If you ever find yourself hired to tutor a spoiled noble lady, you don't give her a nice speech. You march into her room with a frying pan and show her exactly why a slum-born mage with glowing red eyes is her worst nightmare. See, in this world, commoners are legally capped at low-tier magic, but our boy Derek is out here decapitating monsters with pure mana, effortlessly blocking a storm of golden spears that would kill a regular wizard, and swinging off arena structures like an absolute madman. He doesn't just play by different rules. He paints the floor with his enemies and throws raw lightning right into the faces of the high-end mighty nobles who look down on him. Don't mistake him for a soft-hearted savior, because he will literally leave a screaming girl encased in ice and hold a blade to her throat just to teach her how to survive, looking down on anyone who challenges him with a gaze cold enough to freeze hell. But to understand how a kid born in the absolute dirt, who was legally forbidden from ever being strong, became the most feared teacher in the empire, we have to go back to the day it all started. In the towering shadow of Ebelstein, the city's shining spires look down on a completely different world, where a tattered old man tries to impress children with a pathetic spark of light. The slum dwellers, this pathetic excuse for a wizard is just a lying old geezer who wanders the muddy streets with a bucket and a staff, bragging about being a legendary archmage despite only knowing basic one-star tricks. He screams at anyone who laughs, physically shaking any kid brave enough to pull a prank on him. But watching from a safe distance is a quiet, white-haired boy. This silent observer is Derek, dressed in rags but possessing a gaze far too sharp for a child. Against all odds, he becomes the old fraud's apprentice, sitting by campfires while the old man points fingers and demands absolute obedience. The old man only wants a gullible servant to do his chores, unaware that his quiet assistant is studying his every move. As Derek kneels in the dirt, a brilliant blue light begins to wrap around his small frame, releasing a soft, controlled breath as the energy settles. The old man freezes in utter disbelief, wondering if this street kid has actually mastered mana flow. As Derek's eyes lock onto a nearby tree, the energy swirling faster around his hands, hardening his expression into absolute focus. With a sudden thrust of his arm, he releases a massive burst of magic, channeling the raw current straight forward, shaping it into a spectral blue spear that tears through the air, shattering the target in a blinding flash of light. Derek sits calmly in the grass, evaluating his success, while his mentor breaks out in a cold sweat, unable to process what he just saw. Though completely exhausted, our street raised spellcaster shows no pride, silently enduring endless errands until he officially registers as a one-star mage. But under the dark night sky, the old man gets drunk on cheap liquor, bitterly muttering that noble children reach 3 stars before they even grow up. He warns Derek that commoners are inherently inferior, destined to hit a wall they can never climb, telling him not to get cocky because his miserable skills will fail him. He rants that magic is entirely about bloodline, screaming that struggling is futile, projecting all of his own bitter failures onto his young student. Derek simply sits in silence, watching his mentor drift off to sleep during a night that feels endlessly long. The next morning brings a cold, heavy rain, soaking the old man's lifeless body. The old fraud is dead, his skin covered in ugly bruises that tell a violent story. With a heavy shovel slicing through the mud, Derek stands barefoot in the cold earth, digging a grave after learning the guards beat the old man to death. He places a simple wooden cross over the mound, knowing his mentor died trying to steal a 2-star spellbook from a wealthy warehouse. As tears mix with the rain on Derek's face, a glowing blue interface suddenly materializes, offering him a choice of magical schools that cannot be changed. Our slum-born prodigy stares intensely at the floating text, choosing his path with absolute resolve. 4 quiet years pass over the medieval town, its streets peaceful but hiding a boy growing in power. Enter Keisha Flameheart, standing with crossed arms and a sheathed sword, the former mistress of a fallen viscounty, whose 3-star magic made her highly sought after by mercenary groups. While taking contracts in Ebelstein, she takes Derek under her wing, teaching him advanced theories that no ordinary commoner should ever learn. Inside the noisy tavern known as Belden's Tier, she tells him it is only natural to want to rise higher, recognizing his undeniable talent. But she warns him that excessive greed will only ruin his progress, which Derek quietly accepts as he prepares to practice. She instructs him to close his eyes and feel his mana, sensing where it generates and how it flows, shaping a mental image into physical reality. As Keisha turns her back for just a second, the air begins to vibrate, a violent swirl of blue magic erupting around the boy. He turns back in absolute shock, realizing his innate mana is far beyond anything she anticipated, just as Derek pushes his power to its absolute limit. A blinding burst of energy erupts from his body, shaking the entire tavern with a thundering boom that echoes through the streets like a small earthquake. Terrified mercenaries jump to their feet, screaming about an attack as panicked patrons scramble for cover. Derek stands breathless and shaking, trying to process the raw power he just unleashed, until Keisha grabs his arm and drags him away before the guards arrive. He pulls him out into the chaos of the main room, slipping past shouting mercenaries searching for the source of the blast, and sliding past confused patrons into a quiet side exit. They duck into a dark, narrow alleyway, where Derek breathlessly asks what just happened. Keisha rounds on him with an incredibly grave expression, telling him to listen very closely, because nobles are insanely protective of their status, and magic is their most prized privilege. He explains that while strength is a blessing for nobles, a commoner reaching 3 stars is viewed as a threat, and reveals that the spell he just cast on sheer instinct was actually a highly complex 2-star illusion spell called auditory hallucination. With that accidental breakthrough, 14-year-old Derek officially becomes a 2-star mage, his success confirmed by a glowing system notification. For the next year, they travel together as she passes down advanced spells, sharing stories of the high society she left behind while Derek quietly polishes his blade. Their journey ends when Keisha receives an offer she cannot refuse, appointed as a private tutor for the prestigious House Elvester, a family so powerful that even the capital's Grand Duke bows to them. Though sad to leave, she knows this is a massive blessing for a fallen noble, waving a warm goodbye as her carriage rolls away. She leaves him with a rare 2-star spellbook, which expands his growing list of mastered spells, and Derek immediately sits down to study. He steps out into the sunlight after mastering 2 more spells through pure self-study, refusing to let his commoner status limit his growth, his eyes burning with ambition, gripping his cloak tightly as he resolves never to stop climbing. Back at the tavern Belden's Tier, the mercenary contact excitedly waves a piece of paper, shouting that they have a proper high-paying request, which Derek immediately questions. The contact reveals it is from the Grand Duchy of Duplain, gesturing wildly at the thought of noble gold. Derek asks why a Grand Ducal house would ever hire low-ranking mercenaries like them. But the contact screams that it doesn't matter because the Duplain family spends gold like water. He grabs Derek's arm, urging him to build connections, but our sharp-eyed mercenary shrugs him off, demanding to know the details of the job. The contact claims they just want a few monsters cleared on the outskirts, placing a shiny coin on the table as proof. Derek rubs his chin, feeling that something is incredibly off about such a massive family outsourcing basic extermination work, and flatly refuses the job, walking away despite the contact's loud protests. He tells the contact to find someone else because he does not take shady jobs, but the desperate contact yells that he has no other choice, because the client specifically demanded a mage, a rarity among mercenary corps. He pleads with Derek, calling him the only one who can save him, but Derek remains skeptical, questioning why a simple monster hunt requires specialized magic. Just as he turns to leave, the contact slams down a single gold coin, stretching his hand over the counter to emphasize that this is just the advance payment. Derek stares at the glittering gold, his mercenary instincts finally winning out. The clients wait in a quiet room, a young noblewoman hidden beneath a heavy blue hood, and the contact quickly introduces Derek to them. The lead representative, a stern man with a monocle, flatly rejects Derek, sneering at a kid who hasn't even had his coming-of-age ceremony. He mutters that he had high expectations after hearing of Derek's wartime achievements, but refuses to trust a child. The flustered contact sweats profusely, insisting that this kid is the absolute real deal, patting Derek's shoulder and calling him the finest mage in Ebelstein. The monocled man dismisses them, turning his back, but as the group prepares to walk out, they stop and glance back at Derek's silent composure. Recognizing a quiet power, the leader asks for his name, and Derek calmly suggests they step outside for a demonstration. Out in the woods, a massive blue magical blast obliterates a charging goblin, Derek's eyes glowing with intense magical energy. He locks onto his next target with a cold, terrifying gaze, severing a goblin's head with a clean, magic-infused slash. He lunges forward, a blur of motion, releasing a sharp red arc of energy that slices through the air, leaving a screaming beast clutching its chest in agony. Without breaking a sweat, Derek calmly senses another monster rushing him from behind, and as the beast leaps with bared teeth, he pivots and strikes with a blinding burst of force. Standing in the shadows of the forest with eyes glowing like hot coals, he fires a final blue magical blast that leaves the remaining monsters scattering, the magical energy slowly dissipating from his fingertips. He looks back at the clients, casually announcing that the job is complete, standing perfectly composed amidst the carnage, while the dispatch officer and his companions watch in stunned silence. The leader stammers, unable to believe how quickly a child cleared the threat, while the hooded woman smiles with a knowing expression. Back at Belden's Tier that evening, a fiery young mercenary named Pelin screams that Derek has become a dirty noble's dog. The contact tries to calm her down, begging her to keep her voice down for the customers, but she rants on, declaring that commoners should never throw away their pride. The contact asks if she even knows how much the job pays, and she mockingly asks what pittance could possibly make him crawl between a noble's legs. The contact raises a single finger, and she gasps, assuming it is 1 silver coin, but he smiles knowingly, revealing it is actually 1 solid gold coin, leaving her completely speechless, before she immediately screams that she wants to crawl between noble legs too. As Pelin passes out face down on the table, the contact asks how the mission really went, and Derek notes it was just basic goblins, though the contact comments on how wealthy the clients seemed despite their rough looks. Derek quietly sips his drink, revealing that every single one of them was lying. The contact looks stunned, as Derek explains that the dispatch officer claimed to look for youth and stamina, yet had none of those traits. Furthermore, the woman pretending to be a scullery maid had hands far too clean and soft for manual labor, and the trainee inspector was clearly hiding a much higher rank. Derek remains highly cautious, analyzing the hidden layers of their client's cover. The contact shrugs, saying mercenaries shouldn't ask questions as long as they get paid, and that doing the job and taking the coin is all that matters. Derek agrees, sitting quietly as the tavern's chatter fades, telling himself that nothing else matters as long as he survives. The next day rises bright and clear as they travel deep into the prestigious Grand Duchy of Duplain. Standing amidst a pile of defeated goblins, Derek declares the perimeter completely cleared, meeting the clients in the open field to settle the score. The monocled leader praises his work, preparing to hand over the remaining payment. Derek's companion practically loses his mind, holding up 2 gold coins and shouting about what they can buy. But Derek tells him to calm down and act professional. The leader clears his throat and formally offers Derek a brand new, highly classified request. Derek is taken aback as the man reveals the Grand Duchy is willing to pay a staggering 15 gold coins, a sum so massive it leaves Derek completely shocked. The man asks if he will accept, and Derek nods without hesitation. They follow a winding road under a brilliant sky, their carriage rolling toward an elite estate. They pull up to the massive, heavily guarded Duplain mansion, the scale of the estate leaving Derek's companion completely breathless. The monocled leader stops them, stating it is time for a formal introduction. The companion laughs, saying they already know each other, but the leader bows, introducing himself as Diella, the Grand Steward of House Duplain. He offers a formal apology for hiding his identity due to the secrecy of the mission. The companion panics, realizing they've been speaking casually to high nobility, while the scullery maid steps forward, introducing herself as Katerina, the head maid. The companion stammers, trying to offer a respectful greeting as a mere mercenary captain. They stand face to face, the divide in class suddenly feeling incredibly real. Derek internally notes that his deductions were spot on, remaining perfectly calm despite learning his clients are top-tier noble staff. A heavy rustle of silk draws their attention, and Derek wonders who is arriving next, as a mysterious, elegant figure turns to face them. The young noblewoman pulls back her hood, introducing herself as Diella Duplain, and formally requests Derek to become the magic tutor for her troublesome younger sister. She gazes at him with an intense, captivating expression, leaving our sharp-eyed mercenary completely stunned by the sheer gravity of teaching a high noble lady. But in the far distance, a mysterious armored figure watches in silence. Under the brilliant blue sky, the massive Duplain residence stands as a fortress of noble pride, where servants and guards move with quiet precision. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the Duke's private study are slammed open, as Raig bursts in, demanding his father and sister look at the latest disaster. He stands in the center of the room, panting with rage, while the stern Duke looks up, coldly commanding him to act with dignity. The Duke casually continues writing with his quill, but Raig screams that the one who needs dignity is his monstrous younger sister, Diella, as a sobbing maid stands trembling behind him. He rants that Diella has gone too far, physically abusing the servants he personally hired. Aizelin, sitting nearby, coldly demands he lower his voice because they are in the middle of a discussion. Raig gestures wildly, shouting that over 10 servants quit just last month because Diella smashes everything she touches. He stands before his silent father, accusing the Duke of turning a blind eye to a violent thug. The Duke continues writing, ignoring the outburst, until he finally snaps, roaring Raig's name with terrifying authority. Raig flinches under the gaze but glares back, as the Duke flatly orders him to leave the room. Raig refuses to back down, arguing that even if Diella is a complete good-for-nothing, they still have Aizelin to carry the family's legacy. He insists it is time to formally let Diella go, his eyes showing a cold, calculated ambition. The Duke slowly removes his glasses, reminding Raig that this is not his decision to make. He reveals he has already contacted a monastery with excellent facilities, suggesting Diella devote herself to God rather than remain a burden to the family. But as Raig tries to press further, the Duke's hand flies out, grabbing his head with overwhelming force, slamming him violently downward, shattering his composure in a brutal display of dominance. The Duke glares down, repeating with icy absolute finality that the family's fate is his decision alone. Raig looks up from the floor, blood dripping from his face, whispering that a choice must eventually be made. The Duke simply glares, his expression unyielding. A short while later, Aizelin leads Derek down the sprawling halls, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Derek asks about Diella, noting her name is in the registry, but she remains a mystery to the public. Aizelin sadly confirms that her younger sister is kept hidden from high society. Suddenly, another set of double doors swings open, and they encounter Valerian, the eldest son, walking with a servant. Valerian smiles warmly, greeting his sister and asking about her time in Ebelstein. Aizelin responds politely, thanking him for his concern, while Valerian gestures to the bloodied Raig limping beside him, saying they must catch up later. Derek bows respectfully as they pass, watching the two brothers walk away with a highly analytical gaze. His red eyes narrow, noticing a terrified maid crying in the background, before locking his expression back to absolute neutrality. They enter the study, where the Duke expresses relief that Aizelin returned safely, and Aizelin introduces Derek as the magic tutor she brought specifically for Diella. The Duke hums thoughtfully, studying the young man as Aizelin prepares to leave them to speak in private. But before Derek can follow, the Duke's voice rings out, ordering him to stay behind. The doors close, leaving Derek alone with the ruler of the house. Our pragmatic spellslinger remains perfectly composed, as the Duke slowly sets down his quill, asking if a 16-year-old child can truly handle magic. Derek responds with practiced politeness, claiming he can only use basic one-star spells. The Duke stares intensely, warning him that lying is entirely pointless, as false humility is rarely seen as a virtue. Derek holds his gaze, as an overwhelming surge of blue mana erupts from the Duke's body, making our slum-born tutor realize that playing dumb is useless against a formidable 5-star mages. He bows deeply, offering a formal apology for his lack of transparency. The Duke dismisses the apology, noting that carrying oneself with excessive talent can eat away at a commoner. He scrutinizes Derek's simple attire, remarking that he looks nothing like a proper academic tutor, and Derek confidently responds that he is, first and foremost, a mercenary. Accepting Azalin's judgment, the Duke grants him access to Diella's private annex, telling him to have a maid guide him out, but Derek hesitates, asking for one favor. The Duke nods for him to proceed, and Derek states that as a mercenary, he has a duty to see his commission through, ensuring Diella learns magic and safely enters high society. The Duke asks why he is spelling out the obvious, and Derek looks him dead in the eye, saying he has an earnest request to make. The Duke can only stare in silent confusion. Meanwhile, in the private annex, a ceramic plate flies through the air like a frisbee, shattering against the wall in a spray of sharp shards. Terrified Mage shrieks in absolute horror, begging for forgiveness on her hands and knees. Lady Diella stands over her, sneering that a lowly servant's apology changes nothing. She orders the maid to get out, threatening to throw the next plate directly at her face. The maid scrambles away, completely traumatized. In another part of the mansion, a nobleman sips hot tea, asking Azalin why she hired a random mercenary when elite magic tutors are practically begging to work for Duplain. He points out that a commoner will face massive discrimination trying to teach a noble. Azalin looks down with deep exhaustion, admitting she has already tried every famous master on the continent. She explains that they all gave up in frustration, forcing her to look for capable mages in desperate circumstances. The man counters that, while Derek's master was a fallen noble who taught him proper etiquette, he remains a street-born mercenary. Azalin smiles gently, hoping Derek's refined and kind nature will allow him to gently lead Diella. But the man laughs, warning her that she needs to see through people much better, reminding her that Derek grew up on the brutal streets, asking if she truly believes a street rat can survive on nothing but kindness. Azalin can only watch him in contemplative silence. Outside the annex, Derek stands silently flanked by a butler and a maid, before stepping forward toward the heavy wooden door. Our street-raised wizard reaches out, knocking firmly, waiting a brief moment in total composure. He turns the brass handle, opening the door to offer a formal greeting. He steps into the room, politely introducing himself as Derek, while Diella sits by the window, coldly telling him to come closer. He walks forward, keeping his guard up, as Diella watches him with a shadowed, icy glare. Her lips curl into a sinister, cruel smile, and before he can react, a massive wave of dirty water crashes directly into his face, leaving him standing completely drenched, his eyes shut tight. Diella mockingly gasps, claiming she thought a massive sewer rat had just walked in. A wooden bucket clatters to the floor near her feet, as Derek stands dripping and silent before his new student. She laughs, sneering that being drenched in gutter water suits a filthy street rat perfectly. She rests her foot mockingly on the furniture, asking if this little welcome gift brings back fond memories of his hometown slums. Derek remains perfectly still, dirty water dripping from his wet hair, maintaining his absolute stony silence. She sighs dramatically, saying it is a shame she ran out of water so quickly. But when Derek slowly opens his eyes and looks up, Diella recoils in sudden, startled fear, instantly screaming at him for daring to look at her as she kicks him hard in the chest. Derek takes the blow, dropping to his knees, while Diella curses under her breath, covering her nose and complaining that he smells like garbage. Derek watches her from the floor, his face completely expressionless. She sneers at him to know his place, sitting back down on her luxurious sofa, mockingly asking if they ever taught him basic common sense on the streets. But we flash back to the Duke's private study, where books and parchment lay forgotten, the Duke standing by the window deep in thought. He recalls Derek's parting words, warning him that Diella's deep-rooted issues cannot be solved with standard methods. Derek had leaned forward, asking the Duke a single, chilling question: who truly loves Lady Diella more than anyone else? And as the mystery deepens, a terrifying figure in a mask and top hat stands waiting in the shadows. Clouds float quietly above a forest clearing, where our slum-born mage sits in a wooden cart with Azalin, who asks him flat out, "What would you do if a stubborn student rejected kindness?" He muses that her instinct is to try and understand them, but our commoner wizard remains skeptical of such idealistic goals. As Azalin explains that the essence of teaching is to guide a student forward, she admits that when understanding fails, they must find a different starting point, her expression hardening as she reveals her ultimate method is by carving fear into them. Now the little Spitfire is left kneeling on the floor in absolute shock, as Derek coldly tells her to treat others with consideration and respect. Derek snaps, "Get up," warning her not to make him say things twice, causing her hands to clench furiously against the cold floor before she suddenly lunges at him in a desperate outburst. She screams, asking how a lowly commoner dares to lay a hand on her, but her rage instantly turns to utter bewilderment as he warns her. "I won't make you say things twice either." He looms over her like a shadow, demanding she behave with basic decency, which is when the butler bursts in, screaming at this lowborn for touching his young lady. Delbriton stands trembling with outrage at the door, rushing over to ask his young mistress if she is all right, before threatening Derek with the Grand Duke's wrath. The servants watch the tense standoff in silent horror, but our star lecturer simply pulls a scroll from his coat. He calmly announces, "His Grace has granted me full authority over her education," showing the official ducal seal that permits him to use any method he pleases. The butler's jaw drops as he reads the document, his face paling with nervous sweat, while the tiny terror watches in utter disbelief. Later that night, under a brilliant full moon, Diella's older brother Valerian is shouting in a desperate panic. He storms down the grand hallway, screaming with absolute distress, until he spots Derek and demands to know if he is the mercenary tutor. Our commoner wizard just stares back with a face of pure stone, even as the distressed noble grabs his shirt collar with violent force. Valerian shakes him, demanding to know how he dared to hit his little sister, as his companion tries desperately to pull him back and de-escalate the scene. Derek calmly states that his actions were fully permitted by the Duke himself, while Raig reminds the angry brother that Derek is Azelin's guest. He points out that their father authorized the lessons, prompting Valerian to release Derek and tell Raig to mind his own business. Raig admits to Derek that the bratty girl indeed needs a harsh lesson, patting his shoulder and assuring him that Valerian won't do anything reckless. Our star lecturer glances back with his usual unbothered expression, while Raig sighs, wondering why Valerian is so fiercely protective of a hopeless cause. Inside a dark, quiet room illuminated by a single beam of light, Valerian leads our street-smart tutor inside, explaining that this is the old room Diella used in the main estate. Derek stops in front of an unfinished painting resting on an easel, as Valerian explains with a nostalgic smile that she used to love drawing. He recalls how her face would turn bright red with pride when showing him her work, but notes she never actually finished them, always leaving blank spaces for the parts she disliked. Valerian then quietly apologizes for losing his temper earlier, which Derek easily brushes off, before asking why he was brought to this room in the first place. The brother admits he wanted to prove that Diella isn't just a child who deserves to be beaten, even though she recently became obsessively focused on her noble bloodline. She was eventually locked away in the annex, leaving him clueless about what changed her. Derek listens, knowing they must save her from being banished to a monastery, while Valerian pleads that if she can learn just a single basic spell, their father might reconsider. He begs our slum-born mage to save her, placing both hands on Derek's shoulders in a desperate plea. But as Derek looks at the dusty books, he realizes something. He notices that the margins of her magic texts are absolutely covered in notes, proving she never actually gave up on magic as he flips through the pages. Valerian points out that those are all theory books from the prestigious School of Regulations, which Derek confirms, realizing that noble kids are only taught that specific path. His eyes narrow as the pieces fall into place, staring at her detailed artwork, which holds the key to her actual affinity. Resolved, he promises to give it a try, handing the volume back to the relieved brother. Later that night, while the tiny terror sleeps peacefully in her bed, Derek quietly approaches her holding a heavy wooden bucket of water, dumping it right over her head with a violent splash. He sits up coughing in absolute shock, as our commoner wizard coldly asks, "Are you seriously falling asleep right now?" She glares at him with pure murderous rage, screaming that he must be insane, but he merely orders her to follow him outside immediately. He grabs her arm and drags her away despite her frantic struggles, pulling her down the dark hallways as she screams for him to let go. A maid spots them and shrieks for someone to stop the lowborn, but Derek ignores her and forces the girl out onto the dark grounds. He stops and points toward the deep, silent woods, throwing her onto the damp grass as she trembles with fear. She glares up at him, her face flushed with anger, screaming that nothing he does will ever change her hopeless reality. Derek tilts his head, offering to share an interesting fact. He stares at him in tense confusion, as our slum-born mage grins sharply and admits, "I don't have any intention of teaching you magic." His gloved hands clench tightly as he looks down, leaving her completely paralyzed with raw terror. She looks down at her clothes in total shock, trying to process his words as Derek sits on the grass, explaining that a commoner has no reason to like arrogant nobles. He admits this entire tutoring gig is just a convenient excuse, his eye glowing with a sinister red light as he leans in close. He looks up in a dazed panic as he asks if she knows how beautifully nobles scream when they are broken. He scrambles backward in the dirt, screaming to know if he thinks he'll survive this, but Derek smiles coldly, reminding her that she is being sent to a monastery anyway, meaning absolutely no one will ever believe a word she says. He says he can easily trade his commoner life for the fun of breaking her, his face twisting into a cruel, manic grin as his glowing sword casts a chilling blue light across her face. Trembling on the ground, she looks up at him, before suddenly scrambling to her feet and running for her life. He sprints blindly through the pitch-black forest, branches scratching her face, leaping over a fallen log in sheer desperation. She gasps for air as she runs, her feet pounding against the damp earth when a sudden flash of heat cuts through the darkness. A violent sphere of fire manifests in the air, crackling with destructive, untamed power, as our commoner wizard stands behind her, holding the blazing orb. She stops dead, recognizing the signature of a fireball, terrified that a mere commoner can cast two-star magic so effortlessly. Derek looms in the dark shadow of the trees, wearing a cold, mocking smile, before unleashing the blazing spell. The fireball streaks through the night sky like a falling meteor, exploding violently right beside her feet. She screams and collapses in panic as a massive cloud of dirt and smoke erupts around her. The shockwave throws her body to the ground, leaving her gasping in the dirt, while Derek's eyes glow with a demonic red light. He smiles mockingly down at her, calmly remarking that he missed. The brilliant full moon casts a quiet glow over the dark forest, as Diella's legs sprint frantically through the thick brush. She looks back with a sweating, terrified face, before her foot catches on a fallen tree trunk, sending her crashing hard onto the dirt floor. She struggles to push herself back up, when a sudden rustling of leaves alerts her to danger, making her look up in pure panic, just as a magical spear of light streaks down from the sky. She lunges forward in a desperate dodge, as the glowing projectile violently impacts the ground behind her. She stares back in horror at the smoking crater, where the magical spear remains deeply embedded in the earth. Our commoner wizard steps out of the shadows, commenting, "You're pretty quick." He says it is hard to believe that speed belongs to someone locked up all day. She immediately scrambles back up and continues her desperate run, while our slum-born mage watches her from behind with a focused expression. The tiny terror runs blindly, wondering if she can ever escape his pursuit, when she suddenly realizes she knows this part of the woods. Crouching low, Derek casts a tracking spell with a swirling blue aura, touching the earth to send a ripple of mana through the ground. He stands up, sensing the magical residue in the air, as his eyes glow with a brilliant red light. He realizes this is the exact forest she used to play in as a child, the very one depicted in her unfinished landscape paintings. Our commoner wizard realizes she was unconsciously sensing the natural mana here. Suddenly, Diella lets out a fierce scream as she lifts a heavy rock, lunging down from a high ledge to strike Derek from above. But our star lecturer effortlessly blocks her desperate attack, creating a sharp shockwave that shatters her weapon. He stands tall over her with his defensive blade drawn, leaving her staring up at him in absolute shock. Derek praises her spirit, admitting that choosing to fight was an admirable decision, as he draws his sword to bring this chase to an end. He stands over her trembling form, as she breathes heavily, completely exhausted on the ground. He looks down at her with glowing red eyes, noting she has no strength left, pointing his sharp blade directly at her throat and asking, "Any last words?" She stares up at him in terror, letting out a cynical, breathless laugh as she spits back. "Just kill me," refusing to grovel before a commoner. Derek stares at her intensely, asking, "Why are you so obsessed with bloodline?" She snaps back, asking what else she would have left if that was taken from her. He screams about magic, punching the dirt floor in sheer frustration. Tears stream down her face as she asks if he thinks she never tried, sobbing violently as she confesses her absolute failure. Derek watches her emotional breakdown in silent composure, as she wails that no matter how hard she tried, magic never worked. She laments that she failed at painting, failed at magic, and is being weeded out of everything, asking what she is if she loses the only thing she has left, her voice cracking with pure despair as she asks who she even is without her bloodline. Our street-smart tutor remains quiet for a moment, before blue magical energy begins to surge around his hand. He raises his glowing sword, coldly stating he has heard enough, looming over her as he prepares to strike. He looks down at her and whispers a final, cold goodbye. The magical energy explodes into a brilliant blue light, as sharp spikes of ice suddenly erupt from the cold ground, filling the entire clearing with a flurry of frozen crystals. The frosty fragments swirl all around them, as the little Spitfire braces for impact. But she opens her eyes to find she is completely unharmed, the ice spell having formed a protective circle around her, with glowing shards of frost floating in the air. She stares in absolute wonder at the frozen barrier, as Derek looks down at her with a calm expression. She is encased within the brilliant cage of ice, looking down at her own hands as they glow with genuine mana. Derek slides his sword back into its scabbard, our star lecturer bowing respectfully, saying, "Good work, Lady Diella." He asks her to pardon his rudeness as tears of pure relief spill down her cheeks. He explains that while this was just a raw manifestation of mana, she has finally done it. He struggles to hold back her overwhelming emotion, before bursting into loud, sobbing tears, crying out from the bottom of her heart inside her frozen cage. The ice slowly settles into the damp forest floor, as our slum-born mage stands quietly beside the weeping girl. Sitting on a log, she listens as Derek explains she belongs to the school of the wild. He notes that most nobles are only taught the rigid school of regulations, as he wraps a fresh bandage around his hand. He explains that forcing her wild talent into rigid noble theories was bound to fail, comparing it to forcing herself into clothes that simply do not fit her body. She looks up in surprise, asking how he could possibly know her true affinity, as he points out that her paintings of nature proved it. He explains she was naturally sensing and drawing the mana around her, which is a common trait for mages of the wild. Derek tells her that she should be able to walk now, pointing to her bandaged feet as they stand together. He notes she succeeded in manifesting mana, but still has a very long way to go, promising to teach her how to channel it naturally starting tomorrow. She crosses her arms and blushes, quietly thanking him for his guidance. Derek remains silent with a calm look before leading her back through the dark forest. As they walk, he asks if she drew the beautiful sunset painting in her room, which she admits was her proudest masterpiece. The next morning, bright sunlight streams through the grand windows, as Diella sits on her bed with intense focus, trying desperately to manifest blue energy in her hand. He concentrates with wide, determined eyes, but grumbles in frustration as the magic fizzles out. Outside, a maid carries a heavy wooden bucket down the hall, when Diella suddenly swings her door open and startles her. The water splashes violently from the bucket, soaking the hem of Diella's dress. The maid panics, apologizing frantically in total shock, as Diella stares down at her dress with an intense, focused expression. The maid drops to her knees, begging for forgiveness and expecting a beating, but Diella simply walks past her without saying a word. The servant is left completely bewildered, wondering why she wasn't struck, as another maid rushes over to make sure she is unharmed. They whisper to each other, shocked by the lady's sudden change in behavior. Meanwhile, our star lecturer is sleeping peacefully in his bed, when Diella begins pounding furiously on his bedroom door. He groans as he is rudely awoken from his sleep, rubbing his sleep-filled eyes as he asks, "What is it?" The butler reprimands her for such unseemly behavior, but she ignores him, demanding Derek teach her how to handle her mana. Delbritain gasps in absolute shock, realizing she has actually manifested magic. She insists he teach her right this instant, but Derek simply tells her to come back in the afternoon and slams the door. The butler weeps with joy at her breakthrough, while Diella scowls, screaming at him to open the door and teach her immediately. Behind the closed door, our commoner wizard looks thoroughly exhausted, falling right back onto his bed to sleep, while the tiny terror continues to scream outside his door. While the grand Duplain estate basks under a peaceful blue sky, gossip is already spreading across the carpeted hallways, where the mansion maids are whispering in absolute disbelief about how Lady Diella didn't shatter a single plate today, and has somehow manifested her very first spark of real magic. Our white-haired tutor catches wind of their chatter and immediately sharpens his focus. While deep inside the study, the Duke halts his writing to process the shocking news that his difficult daughter has finally succeeded. Her brother Raig confirms the rumors are true, and while the relieved Duke is ready to celebrate, Raig warns his father not to get their hopes up just yet. The Duke scolds his son for being so cold, but Raig remains convinced that a tiny flash of magic shouldn't save her from the convent. The Duke simply sighs and goes back to his desk, leaving the matter undecided. Meanwhile, the newly minted Mage herself is sitting on her bed, pouting like a child, which prompts our pragmatic mercenary to ask if she is already sulking. He warns her that acting spiteful will not change a thing, but Diella fires back that she isn't being spiteful, she is furious. Derek calmly explains that learning requires patience and order, which only makes her shout that she is angry, not pouting, as she leaps to her feet to glare at him. She quickly loses her balance and ends up on the floor, sheepishly admitting that maybe she is pouting, while Derek warns her that using unstable magic is an easy way to get hurt. Speaking from his own painful mercenary experience, the coin-loving instructor hands her a book and tells her she has rested enough. She groans and mocks his stuffy teacher routine, so Derek offers to show her a much more practical, violent way to learn, conjuring up terrifying mental images of brutal magic combat. Diella freezes in absolute horror at the threat, instantly deciding that staying in her chair and studying is actually a wonderful idea. With her cooperation secured, Derek summons a swirl of blue energy to demonstrate proper manifestation, explaining that the School of the Wild is perfect for her because it lacks rigid rules. It is all about raw, untamed freedom, which fits her chaotic personality shockingly well. Diella blinks in confusion at his words, but Derek clarifies that her untamable nature makes her highly compatible with the wild element, and since she carries the prestigious Duplain blood, she is actually overflowing with talent. The stubborn girl is stunned to hear him praise her, her cheeks turning bright red as she tries to process the compliment. When she asks if this makes her some kind of genius, Derek quickly shuts down her ego, pointing out that having talent is not the same as being a genius. They immediately fall back into their usual bickering, trading petty insults across the table. Later that evening, Derek walks through the courtyard, planning her next lesson, only to let out a frustrated sigh as he realizes what he has gotten himself into. By the next morning, his peaceful life is completely shattered, as Diella bursts into his room, desperately trying to control a flickering ball of cold magic, and relentlessly hounds him while he tries to eat his breakfast. She chases him down the hallways, complaining about the weird tingling sensation in her hands, and even tracks him down to his quiet reading spot under a tree. An annoyed Derek demands to know why she won't leave him alone, reminding her that she was supposed to stay near her own annex. Diella stomps her foot, demanding he check her magic progress immediately, but Derek calmly turns the page of his book, totally unfazed by her temper. She drags him along by the hand anyway, eager to show off her success, forcing our white-haired tutor to accompany her back to the main house. Upon arrival, however, Derek is summoned to a private study, where a grand noble silhouette stands against the bright window. The eldest son, Valerian, turns to welcome him and offers him a seat, wasting no time before asking how his sister's training is going. Derek explains that her progress is steady, but mastering one-star spells will take time, prompting Valerian to warn him that their mother is returning next week. His eyes narrow as he warns Derek that she is incredibly strict, and that the high society nobles will never accept a mere commoner tutoring a duke's daughter. Derek appreciates the warning, though he wonders if that is the only reason he was called here. Valerian falls silent for a moment, looking out the window, before explaining that as the next head of House Duplain, he must care deeply for every single member of his family. He sighs, admitting that understanding people is incredibly difficult, while Derek notes that real life rarely aligns with pretty ideals. Tired of the vague philosophy, Derek asks him to get straight to the point, which causes the young noble to strike a dramatic pose, his eyes welling up with tears as he gets incredibly emotional. Derek watches in deadpan silence, as Valerian desperately reminisces about how Diella used to be an absolute angel when they were children. A pragmatic mercenary quietly sips his tea, waiting for the performance to end, until Valerian leans in with teary eyes and begs him for a way to win his sister's love again. Derek nearly chokes on his drink, baffled as to why the heir of a duchy is asking a commoner for sibling advice. Valerian points out that Derek is the only person Diella actually listens to, the sister in question currently shouting for her tutor outside the door. Hoping to prove his brotherly love, Valerian proudly pulls out a handmade doll, revealing a hideous, poorly stitched creation with dead eyes, and eagerly asks if it looks exactly like Diella. Derek asks him flat out, "Are you trying to curse someone?" The critique utterly breaks Valerian's spirit, leaving him weeping on his desk. The peace of the estate doesn't last, as the heavy front doors open a few days later, and Derek is formally greeted by the return of the Duchess herself. She smiles elegantly, noting she has heard great things about her daughter's new tutor, and introduces herself as Diella Duplain. She looks down with the supreme confidence of high nobility, offering to send him a lavish gift from her personal territory as a reward. But our star lecturer simply blunts her momentum, stating he isn't affiliated with any noble house. Miriella's polite smile falters in sheer confusion, and when Derek calmly declares that he is just a commoner, the Duchess's elegant facade completely shatters in horror. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the capital, a masked man in a sharp suit stands with quiet confidence, while a mysterious cloaked figure channels dark purple magic, preparing to throw the Empire into chaos. While the Grand Duplain estate stands silent under the bright morning sun, the tension in the entrance hall is thick enough to cut with a knife, where the newly returned Duchess is still trying to process the shocking revelation that the brilliant magic tutor she was just praising is not a distinguished noble from a prestigious household. And after she graciously offers to send him a luxury gift, our white-haired tutor completely freezes the room by stating he has no affiliation with any house. Miriella's jaw drops in absolute disbelief, and when Derek calmly repeats that he is just a commoner, the proud Duchess looks as though her entire world has just been turned upside down. To understand how we ended up in this glorious diplomatic disaster, we have to go back 1 week, when a grand carriage was parked right in front of the mansion, and the exhausted eldest sister, Aizelin, was preparing to depart. She explained that urgent imperial business in Ebelstein required her immediate attention, leaving her troublesome younger sister entirely in Derek's capable hands. No sooner does the carriage doors close than Linus claps a hand on Derek's shoulder, teasing him for his lifeless response, and telling him to wrap things up before the others make a fuss. As the carriage rolls away, our pragmatic mercenary looks back at Diella, who is watching the departing wheels with a look of sudden panic. She gasps, covering her mouth as she realizes she made a massive mistake, confessing to Linus that she completely forgot to give Derek a crucial heads-up. When Linus questions why a simple family return requires a warning, Diella nervously begins to explain that her mother is a force of nature, which we see firsthand as the heavy double doors of the Duke's study are thrown open. Inside, Duchess Miriella is already pacing the room in a furious rage, shouting at her husband about how a filthy commoner could possibly be allowed to teach their daughter. The Duke, looking utterly exhausted at his desk, asks her to please lower her voice, but Miriella only gets louder, screaming that their beloved youngest child's future is at stake. Her face contorts in pure outrage as she demands an explanation, while the Duke, weary pinch of his nose, reveals he is not a fan of hiring commoners either. He defends his decision by reminding her that every single high-class noble tutor gave up on Diella, but Miriella slams her hands on the desk, disgusted that they resorted to a former mercenary. The Duke counters that Aizelin herself personally recommended him, yet the Duchess insists that there must be some basic standards of decency. She frantically suggests bringing in her younger brother Flam to take over, hoping a proper noble bloodline will wash away the shame. But the Duke scoffs at the idea of abandoning their territories just to manage a spoiled girl. This only triggers another shouting match, with Miriella screaming about high society, declaring that the social circles of Ebelstein are a literal war zone. She gestures wildly, asserting that a tutor's pedigree is everything, and that having a commoner teacher will make Diella the laughingstock of the empire. Just as the argument reaches a boiling point, Valerian steps into the office, pleading with his mother to calm down and stop fighting with his father. Muriella snaps at him to stay out of it, but Valerian calmly shifts the focus, proposing that they simply test the commoner's actual abilities. He turns to his parents with a confident smile, confident that his brother Reg is the perfect candidate to expose any fraud. Muriella looks at her son in surprise, realizing that a magical duel would easily settle the matter, while Valerian stands tall, fully prepared to lead the charge. He argues that if the tutor is truly exceptional, then there should be no issue, and boldly offers to personally defeat Derek in a magic spar to prove his point. But the Duke sternly cuts him off, declaring that Derek is absolutely the real deal. Valerian's confident smile instantly vanishes, forcing him to quickly pivot and suggest testing Diella instead. The Duke raises an eyebrow in curiosity, as Valerian argues that if this tutor is so brilliant, his student should easily show excellent results. He announces that he will arrange a formal spar to verify his sister's progress, leaving the Duke to contemplate the high-stakes proposal in silence. Satisfied, Valerian walks out of the study and down the grand hallway, where he quickly corners his younger brother, Reg. Reg reacts with absolute shock, demanding to know if he has completely lost his mind, asking if he truly believes their sister has somehow turned over a new leaf. Valerian gently defends her, reminding him that she is still their flesh and blood, which only earns a bitter, mocking laugh from Reg. Reg shouts that her prestigious blood is exactly what has been dragging their name through the dirt, and warning that her debut in high society will spell the absolute end of House Duplain. Valerian looks at his brother with a heavy heart, shocked by the sheer depth of his hatred, but Reg simply turns his back, cold and resolute, states that keeping her locked away in the annex is the only way to protect what remains of their family, leaving Valerian standing alone in the silent corridor, his eyes hardening as he makes a dark, tragic decision. The very next morning, Diella bursts into Derek's study in a complete panic, slamming her hands on the table while our pragmatic tutor looks up from his magic book. He tosses a formal challenge scroll onto his lap, flatly warning him that if she loses this duel, he is immediately fired. Derek calmly skims the document, noting that since Reg is a seasoned one-star mage, her odds are incredibly low. Diella screams at his indifferent attitude, furious that he doesn't seem to care about losing his job, but our star lecturer simply reminds her that he is a mercenary. He explains that he does the job he is hired for and takes the coin, nothing more, and since they have already paid him a fortune, his contract is practically fulfilled. Diella looks at him with wide, trembling eyes, utterly crushed by his coldness. Few hours later, the entire household gathers in the grand courtyard, the surrounding spectators whispering anxiously as the duelists take their positions. The Duke watches from his seat, noting Derek's absolute composure, as our silver-haired mercenary stands with his eyes closed, breathing slowly. The Duke is deeply impressed by his nerves of steel, wondering what kind of absolute monster they have brought into their home. Meanwhile, Valerian watches from the sidelines, assessing that the tutor is far too valuable to lose, his gaze shifting to his younger brother Reg, who steps onto the field, his heavy cloak fluttering behind him as he prepares his mana. Reg's face is a mask of absolute coldness, his hands clenching into tight fists as he harbors a dark, bitter thought, determined to completely break his sister's spirit today. He wants to make her regret every single mistake she has ever made. As Diella's red boots step onto the stone arena, her face pale but incredibly set. She remembers their painful conversation from earlier that morning, when she had bitterly asked if he truly didn't care about anything but the money. But Derek had simply pointed out that her magical foundation was already perfectly on track, and that her noble Duplain blood would guarantee her mastery in no time. Diella had demanded to know why he was suddenly saying all of this now, and Derek explained that the School of the Wild is built for self-study, meaning she no longer needs him. Realizing that he is preparing to abandon her, the proud young lady's eyes had filled with hot tears, screaming at him in frustration and anger. Through her sobs, she finally confessed that she wanted to keep learning from him, her fragile exterior completely melting away. Derek had stared at her for a long moment before turning around, admitting that while he doesn't know the first thing about fancy noble rules, and after slowly pulling on his fingerless leather gloves, he can absolutely teach her how to win a dirty, desperate fight. He had looked her dead in the eye, offering her one final choice, while the dark shadows of high society's cruel whispers loomed large in her mind, remembering how everyone had called her a useless failure compared to her brilliant siblings. Wiping the tears from her eyes, she had firmly looked up and told him, "Yeah, make me win." Back in the present, the bright sky is charged with raw, cracking tension as Diella walks forward under the heavy gaze of the crowd. She is no longer standing here as the fragile youngest daughter of the Duplain family, nor as the laughingstock of the high society elite. And as her white-haired tutor watches her from the sidelines, the young girl takes her deep final breath, her eyes suddenly glowing with a fierce, untamed light, standing proud only as Derek's student and a true mage of the wild. With the match about to explode, a splash of raw energy erupts like a liquid wave, summoning the phantom image of a massive white dragon with glowing red eyes, while Derek sits in a meditative focus, mentally preparing her for the trial. Even the small, mystical creatures of the wild seem to sense the heavy pressure, gathering in happy unison as they watch the arena, before freezing in sudden shock as the duel begins. Through the grand stained glass windows of the estate, it feels as though ancient legends of skeleton kings and whispering spirits are watching over them, their spectral feet stepping onto the red carpet of history. A mysterious figure in a white happy mask stands at the threshold of the arena, holding a heavy magical staff as the tension peaks, and stepping onto the wooden floor with deliberate, quiet steps. Small, dark animal peers out from the brush, its glowing eyes filling with nervous tears at the sheer power colliding, its snout twitching in anticipation of the explosion. While in the absolute darkness, a mysterious masked man in a sharp suit looks on, waiting to see if she can truly win. A flag waves high as the match begins, signaling a high-stakes duel under the watchful eyes of the anxious crowd, where the stern judge clears his throat to announce they are playing by the elite salon rules, meaning whichever sibling triggers their protective magic circle first is the loser. With a cold, arrogant nod, our golden-haired rebel steps up to face her opponent, both wearing the protective green amulets designed to block fatal strikes right before impact. It is the kind of lavish safety net only filthy rich nobles can afford, and her brother Rhaeg plans to shatter hers well before the 10-minute mark. The duel ignites as he summons a massive surge of mana, forming a glowing green magic circle that swirls violently around his hand before he tells her to run back to her annex where she belongs. He unleashes a roaring wave of green light, a massive crescent of energy slicing straight down, forcing the spectators to scream out her name in sheer panic as she stands alone in the path of destruction. But instead of freezing, her eyes burn with determination, bracing herself for the impact that leaves Rhaeg wide-eyed and furious as he desperately redirects his spell. The green arc curves sharply to chase her, and watching from the sidelines, our commoner wizard notes that Rhaeg is wasting tons of mana just to make his sloppy, beginner-level combat magic hit its mark. With a sudden burst, a defensive shield of blue ice crystals intercepts the strike, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. She reaches out to steady her stance, while her brother sneers at her unrefined, starless magic trick, unleashing a rapid barrage of magical bolts and raising his hand to channel even more power. He vows to break her defense with pure firepower, bombarding her barrier with everything he has. Yet floating in her mind is the voice of her cynical tutor, reminding her that mercenaries don't care about playing fair, because the only virtue that matters on a real battlefield is finding a way to survive and win. Our pragmatic tutor had stared her down with absolute seriousness, and she had shouted back, accepting the challenge to fight dirty. Now, wearing her crimson hood like a seasoned warrior, she weaves through the explosive crossfire, sprinting across the wooden platform as another lethal arc grazes the air above her. She moves with a wild, unpredictable rhythm, guided by his advice that the weakest fighters can still overcome any gap in strength the moment they stop trying to duel and start trying to survive a real fight. As Rhaeg charges his next attack, another green surge erupts, but she moves too fast to track, using the terrain to her absolute advantage. She crouches low, employing every desperate, unnoble method available to dodge the flashing green light. She waits for the split second he lets his guard down, ready to exploit his single moment of aristocratic arrogance. A devastating blast strikes the platform, fracturing the wood and sending heavy splinters flying through a massive shockwave. She gasps as she is seemingly swallowed by the smoke, leaving her brother to prematurely declare the match over. The fading energy drifts into the sky, and she lies still on the ground as the dust settles. The sheer violence of the explosion erupts into a massive, blinding cloud of debris. A worried noble youth shouts her name in horror, and their mother covers her mouth in absolute terror from the balcony, screaming for them to stop the match immediately before she's killed. But our star lecturer steps in, telling the panicked mother to sit down because it isn't over. The Duchess shrieks that Diella was clearly blasted by the attack, but Derek coolly points out that the protective amulet never activated. He watches with a calm, knowing smirk, while another spectator observes them from a distance. Valyrian notices Derek didn't even blink, realizing the tutor had anticipated this level of growth. On the arena, Rhaeg rushes forward, confused as to how she completely vanished without triggering the protective circle. He looks down in sudden shock as a sharp crack splinters the platform beneath his boots, and a violent surge of blue mana erupts from the dark below. He is launched into the air by a sudden, jagged spire of ice, struggling to regain his balance as he crashes back down. With a look of pure outrage, he screams that attacking from under the platform violates the sacred rules. The elderly butler Delon watches from the sidelines with a faint, amused smile, slowly shaking his head, because the rules never explicitly banned going underneath. A dirty loophole no proper noble would ever think of. Rhaeg scrambles to defend himself as another magical burst tears through the wood, forcing him to leap backward as a massive ice spike pierces the floor. He jumps frantically to avoid the crystalline shards exploding upward, shredding the platform into useless kindling. He realizes with growing panic that he can't hit what he can't see, while she only needs one clean shot to win. He stares wildly through the dust, absolutely disgusted by a fight that has abandoned every shred of noble etiquette. He peers into a massive hole in the floor and screams her name, only to meet the fierce, unwavering gaze of our golden-haired rebel looking back up. her eyes glowing with the raw, cold determination of a survivor. It's the exact same look Derek had when faced with aristocratic bullies in the past. And watching from the bench, Valerian realizes she could never have come up with this brilliant, dirty strategy alone. He silently curses our slum-born mage for corrupting their sister. Unaware of the spectators, Raig clutches his collar to steady his breathing, his cape billowing in the cold wind as he prepares his final, most powerful spell. He decides if she wants a dirty street fight, he'll give her one, extending his hand to unleash a devastating counterattack. As the smoke rises from the ruined arena, the shocked noble ladies on the balcony shriek in horror that Diella has crawled into the dusty crawlspace below, frantically demanding their husbands stop this undignified madness. But the stern Duke Melbarat commands them to keep watching, noting that no rules have actually been broken, his eyes narrowing in deep curiosity at this bizarre spectacle. Crouched in the dark, dusty dirt under the floorboards, our golden-haired rebel waits with absolute focus, tracking the vibrations of the mana flow above her. Above her, Raig feels his concentration shatter, stumbling back in frustration as he realizes she is deliberately targeting his feet the instant he begins to chant. He grits his teeth, looking around wildly, trying to locate the hidden threat below. From her hiding spot, she notices his mana flow stop, patiently waiting for him to start chanting again so she can strike. The butler Delberton watches with growing anxiety as Raig suddenly leaps high into the air, grabbing the tall flagpole to escape her reach. Clinging to the wood, the young noble realizes he can't cast complex spells from this height, leaving him with only one desperate option. Swirling massive blue mana into his fingers, he resolves to pulverize the entire platform to force her out. He fires a devastating, non-verbal blast straight down, shredding the wooden structure with electric arcs of magic. Our slum-born mage watches the desperate move with a cold stare as the floorboards splinter into absolute ruin. Raig drops from the flagpole as a massive wave of debris rains down, pulverizing the entire arena into a massive cloud of dust. The crowd screams his name in terror, but he lands safely on the broken ground, his eyes scanning the thick dust for any movement. Suddenly, a shadow darts through the haze, and he quickly manifests a blue magic arrow in his hand, ready to finish the fight at close range. He fires the streak of light, nearly catching her in the blast, but she reaches out with a desperate grab, her eyes wide with pure survival instinct. The magical arrow streaks past, curving wildly as she evades, narrowly dodging the lethal energy. He stands his ground as she closes the distance, weaving through the debris like a seasoned street fighter. He thinks he has the advantage at close range, but she gracefully slips past his guard and lands a heavy, brutal kick straight to his chest. She grits her teeth, putting everything she has into the blow, forcing him to gasp for air in sheer agony. He clutches his bruised ribs, dropping to his knees as he struggles to breathe. Before he can recover, her hand claws into the dirt, her sweat-streaked face showing she has absolutely no intention of playing nice. He flings a heavy handful of sand directly into his face, blinding him instantly as he shrieks in disgust. He stumbles back, utterly humiliated by her shameless street tactics, realizing she is out of mana and using every desperate physical dirty trick she can find. Wiping the grit from his eyes, he stands tall to face her once more, acknowledging that this fight is no longer about noble pride, but proving her own worth. He resolves to match her determination and fight her with everything he has as her brother. He stands trembling in the distance, clutching her hair as the exhaustion of the battle threatens to drag her down. But in her mind, the voice of our commoner wizard echoes like a lifeline, explaining that mana is simply paint, and casting is nothing more than her brush. A vibrant streak of red energy paints across her memories, recalling when he had demonstrated magic under the starry night sky, his sharp eye gleaming with absolute focus. He had given her the secret to channeling magic without formal structures, his intense gaze burning into her memory as she watched him in absolute awe, their silhouettes standing together under the endless, beautiful cosmos. Now, closing her eyes in deep concentration, she summons every drop of her dormant power, enveloping herself in a massive, swirling blue aura. Repeating his words like a holy mantra, blue sparks of magical energy crackle violently around her fingertips, her glowing blue eyes snapping open with immense power. Forest of massive ice spears manifests around her, leaving the monocled duke sweating in absolute shock as his wife gasps that their talentless daughter is actively casting one-star magic. Even her opponent is stunned by the sudden manifestation of ice spears, as she stands resolute, ready to launch her ultimate attack. The first spear flies through the air, tearing a dark trail of magical distortion behind it. Her brother channels his own blue mana to prepare a defensive shield, shouting that it changes nothing because he is still a level ahead. He fires back as the ice spears rain down, his green eyes burning with a fierce determination to strike her first to claim a hard-fought victory. But deep within her, a wild, icy instinct has awakened, staring out like a winter wolf waiting for its prey. Exactly 1 year ago, the birds nested peacefully in the gardens, while a formal courier delivered an invitation to the upcoming grand social gathering, which our temperamental young lady could only stare at in lonely, bitter silence from the shadows of her room. Now the magical barrier hums and crackles, flickering into existence over the scorched arena like a protective glass dome, leaving our slum-born mage to kneel on the cracked stone in quiet exhaustion, staring down at the aftermath of their intense clash, while Diella bursts into a flood of noisy, dramatic, and absolute hysterics. The surrounding noble audience stares at the ruined platform with absolute horror, whispering frantically among themselves as a snobbish noble couple screeches that this filthy spectacle shouldn't even be called a duel. Poor Diella stands amidst the debris, weeping over her bruised pride, while the older nobles mock her teacher for dragging a lady's dignity through the mud. This is a family where the eldest son, Raymond Oswald, shines in gleaming military armor, possessing those cold, ambitious eyes that the old duke always favored in a successor, and which the young heir carries with immense pride. Yet as the duke gazes down at his youngest daughter, who is still sobbing and wiping her face, he notes with a quiet nod that her eyes have improved. The worried maids scramble to check her injuries, fussing over her clothes and reaching out to help, only for the crying Lily to fiercely slap their hands away. Standing awkwardly across the platform, our commoner wizard hesitates for a second, before gently patting her head and muttering a clumsy word of praise. Ignoring the maids offering to escort her back to her warm chambers, she remains completely unresponsive and downcast, refusing to take a single step forward, until she finally slumps onto a garden bench while her tutor watches her in silence, her eyes fixed entirely on the ground. Clenching her skirt tightly, she chokes out a tearful apology for losing the match, but Derek looks at her with a serious, intense gaze, telling her calmly that it is perfectly fine to lose, and that she must use this burning frustration to climb higher and grow stronger. This friendly advice only triggers another massive wave of loud, echoing sobs from the young lady, which the maids watch in utter despair, until the elegant duchess sweeps into the garden, spotting her daughter in distress. She rushes over with maternal sorrow, hugging her tightly as Diella cries out for her mother, before urging her to go get her injuries treated immediately, which Diella quietly accepts. As our white-haired teacher turns to leave the scene in peace, he looks back in confusion as the Duchess aggressively confronts him, shouting that he is a vulgar wretch, mocking his attempts to teach her daughter basic one-star magic. Derek flinches back, as she accuses him of teaching nothing but cheap, filthy tricks, grabbing him by the collar while screaming that he has smeared filth all over a noble Lily. He stands there, stunned by her furious outburst, while she rants that there is a world of dignity he cannot even begin to comprehend, until Duke Duplain steps in, coldly asking his wife who is actually acting vulgarly right now. The noblewoman gasps in shock, but the Duke chides her lack of decorum, taking her firmly by the arm to escort her away, while she mutters that Derek is just a worthless commoner. The Duke looks down with a stern, icy expression, agreeing that while Derek is indeed a commoner, he is still their daughter's teacher. Our survival-hardened tutor listens in somber silence, as the Duke states that everyone has their own way of loving their child. Gazing at the powerful lord with sharp resolve, Derek stands quietly as the Duke commands him to follow him to the audience room, leading him inside the grand residence building, while the Duchess glares with a bitter, hateful expression. Hovering a fountain pen over an inkwell, the Duke sits at his desk, praising Derek for raising Diella so splendidly, stating that he wishes to grant him the highest realm permitted to a commoner, asking him flat out if he wants the secrets of three-star magic. Derek reacts with visible surprise, his eyes wide as he stares across the desk, realizing this five-star mastermind knows exactly how to bait him with the ultimate offer, which our slum-born mage knows he must seize immediately. But as they speak, a terrifying, monstrous face with a single glowing red eye watches from the absolute depths of darkness. Duplain sits across from our slum-born mage, pointing out that while Diella has made impressive progress, a noble family of their stature requires a dedicated mentor rather than a simple tutor. And as he dips his pen into the inkwell, he warns that a commoner harboring high ambitions is usually seen as an insult by the aristocracy. Derek knows his goals stretch far beyond 3 stars, and though the Duke realizes this talented teacher will eventually move on, he asks if the young man is already packed, insisting that he must stay just a bit longer to guide Diella, even if society draws a hard line for commoners, before flatly offering him the forbidden 3-star spellbooks, which our commoner wizard accepts immediately by replying, "Yes, I want it." Walking through the dusty archives, the scrap metal magician pulls down a massive tome, opening the ancient pages like a starving man sitting down to a royal feast, studying the intricate magical formulas, and marveling at the incredible knowledge that regular commoners spend their entire lives failing to obtain, devouring every page with intense focus, knowing this is his ticket to absolute power. 3 days later, Diella stands with her hands on her hips, proudly announcing, "I'm a 1-star mage now," only for Derek to dryly point out that using a spell exactly once barely qualifies, which sends the temperamental young lady into a shouting fit about his complete lack of enthusiasm, though she quickly recovers and grumbles about how hard magic is. He watches her pout and teasingly reminds her of how she was crying her eyes out during their last battle, making her blush and stammer, "It was just dust that got into my eyes," before she admits she was actually terrified he was going to get kicked out. Smiling at her concern, the sharp-eyed tutor suggests they begin training, praising her rapid growth as something highly unusual, which immediately inflates her ego as she boasts about her talent. She excitedly suggests they start with rapid-fire magic arrows, or perhaps the destructive wind blade her rival Rhaeg used, only for Derek to firmly interrupt and declare that she will be practicing basic manifestation instead, shattering her grand dreams of immediately casting high-level combat magic. He explains that the fundamental basics of managing mana are what truly matter, and though she grumbles about her lost excitement, she reluctantly agrees to follow his lead, staring at him with a blank expression, making him wonder if he has something on his face. Before admitting he is just surprised to see her listen so obediently, he immediately gets defensive, claiming she has always respected his words, which triggers a vivid memory of their first meeting, forcing the embarrassed noble girl to realize some things are impossible to forget, as she loudly laughs and screams about the beautiful weather to escape the awkward silence. Training late into the starry night, the exhausted young lady catches her breath as Derek mentions her upcoming schedule, which she admits is going to be incredibly busy, clutching her head in absolute despair because her magic lessons will now have to compete with formal noble education, leaving her to rattle off a miserable list of piano, history, and sewing, while Derek reminds her that mastering this torture is exactly why her sister Azelyn is celebrated as the pinnacle of high society. Although Diella just wants to focus on her spells, she warns him that while her father is supportive, her snobbish mother will never let his presence stand, fearing that learning from a commoner will turn her daughter into an unrefined sellsword, which Derek acknowledges, before calmly explaining that defeating the Duchess is actually quite simple, as long as they remove the woman's only pretext. Deep within the mansion, the Duchess shivers in terror, imagining her daughter being ruined by a vulgar instructor, fearing Derek is teaching the girl how to interrogate captives in a dark dungeon, which would lead to Diella crashing a high-society banquet while hauling a dead boar, sending the delicate noblewoman screaming in absolute panic, as her daughter cackles like a true villain. Plotting to expel the lowly wizard from her estate, the Duchess mutters to herself, "I'll find a way somehow." Her scheming is cut short when Diella enters the room, and though her mother expects her to run into her arms like a sweet, simple child, the reality is a shocking transformation, leaving the Duchess to stare in utter confusion as Diella drops a perfect noble curtsy, asking, "Did you rest well last night, mother?" The woman breaks out in a cold sweat of sheer disbelief, watching her formerly bratty daughter smile sweetly and discuss her busy schedule of piano lessons, before gracefully excusing herself because her general education routine is so tight. Stammering, the Duchess asks about her etiquette lessons, and Diella beams, thanking her mother for the consideration and expressing how much she looks forward to them, leaving the stunned matriarch with absolutely nothing to say but to awkwardly tell her to run along. Walking out into the sunny courtyard, she encounters a clumsy maid who drops a massive stack of laundry, but instead of flying into a typical noble rage, she gently asks if the girl is hurt and warns her not to overstrain herself, leaving the poor maid trembling in complete shock at this incredibly polite behavior, as Diella continues on her way with perfect grace, having successfully executed Derek's brilliant plan to strip her enemies of any excuse to fire him. While Diella masters the art of playing the perfect high society lady, far away, a deadly sword is drawn, and a mysterious armored knight clad in dark metal prepares to step onto the stage, tightening his grip on his weapon, as monstrous shadows loom in the background, ensuring that Derek's peaceful teaching days are about to get a lot more complicated. While the teacups clink at the exclusive Rosia salon, tucked away in the prestigious Ebelstein Noble district, the local gossip mill is running at full steam as a worried noble lady leans in, staring at the delicate porcelain on the table, which makes Lady Azelyn look up in mild surprise, setting down her cup with an elegant flutter of her hands, before assuring her companion that her recent worries have finally been resolved. Lady Ellen Belmere sighs that it's a relief, admitting she was worried when Azelyn went outside the noble district, as she sits with perfect posture at the tea table, prompting Azelyn to reveal that she was actually on a quest to find a magic teacher for her little sister, Diella, which she explains with a bright, victorious smile. This sends Ellen into an absolute tailspin of disbelief, wondering what kind of legendary master would require a ducal lady's personal search, musing to herself about the absurd pedigree of this mysterious tutor, before asking flat out if she really meant her notoriously wild younger sister, while Denise Beltis quietly sips her tea, absorbing every word. Azelyn cheerfully confirms it, claiming that Diella has transformed so completely she barely even recognized her, leaving the other noblewomen frozen in sheer astonishment, especially when Azelyn brags that the girl has already mastered one-star magic and carries herself with neat, composed dignity. Ellen's internal alarm bells start ringing because the Duplain family usually keeps Diella hidden from public view, forcing her to paste on a smile and offer polite congratulations on finding such a miraculous teacher, whom Azelyn admits is completely statusless, but incredibly capable, having dragged him all the way from the rough-and-tumble Belden mercenary corps. Hearing the word mercenary leaves Ellen completely stunned, while Denise's eyes narrow in deep calculation, as she recalls that Diella was the exact reason their own family cook fled the Duplain estate in terror. In a quick flashback, the trembling cook laments his former trauma, making Denise marvel at how a mere commoner managed to domesticate an infamous brute, which makes her smile with intense curiosity before she politely asks Azelin for the name of this miracle worker. He points out that a teacher who can tame the untamable is bound to become legendary, and she wants to know his name before he becomes untouchable, to which Azelin simply responds that his name is Derek, her pleasant expression showing she has zero regrets about hiring him, gently repeating Derek with absolute pride. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Diella is having a quiet chat about her newfound etiquette, while her silver-haired companion tries to offer a polite, halting compliment, only for Diella to immediately credit her tutor for every single ounce of her success, smiling like a proud student as she gushes about how he made the impossible look easy. The poor woman's mind completely fractures as the name Derek is repeated like a broken record, finally snapping, "That damn Derek," in a burst of sheer, unadulterated fury over this mercenary's influence, as she leaps to her feet with fists clenched, terrified of whatever brainwashing spell he must have cast on her daughter, and swearing she will find a way to put an end to this madness. The household staff is singing a completely different tune, with a maid carrying a water bucket and gossiping about how gentle the young lady has become, while the gardener stops trimming the hedges to note her incredible, sunny mood over the past few weeks, and even the head butler peers through his monocle in sheer disbelief at her newfound elegance, wondering if they are witnessing the birth of a true, refined noblewoman, as she radiates a level of dignity they've never seen before. Out on the lawns, our slum-born mage is panting heavily after a grueling night training session, when Linus Belmeard suddenly steps out of the shadows with an apologetic grin, standing over the exhausted commoner, who merely looks up and asks what brings him out so late. They sit down together on a fallen log to talk, where Linus immediately spots a heavy book on the grass, gasping when he realizes it's an incredibly rare 3-star spellbook, which our red-eyed tutor calmly explains he's studying ahead of schedule because a little extra preparation never hurts. Deep down, even the most critical observer would have to admit he has the soul of a true scholar, leaving Linus absolutely awestruck by his relentless dedication, before Derek redirects the conversation back to the young lady of the house, prompting a very embarrassed Linus to ask, "What do teenage girls like these days?" which earns him a completely blank stare from our commoner wizard. Linus nervously suggests that maybe a handmade embroidered doll of herself would make a sweet gift, revealing a draft of an absolutely hideous, curse-inducing plushie that makes Derek look at him with pure, unmitigated horror before delivering a flat, "Absolutely not." Linus quickly backs down, laughing off the creepy craft project as a hypothetical joke, before standing up and suggesting they head inside for the night, as they walk side by side across the dark grass. Suddenly, young Master Diella Duplain stops to thank our tutor, expressing his deep gratitude, noting how the tense atmosphere in the mansion has completely cleared, and how even Valerian is finally focusing on his duties, glancing over his shoulder to add that even their imposing father seems quietly satisfied, which earns a soft, understanding chuckle from Derek. Noble youth sighs, looking up at the night sky and reflecting on how difficult it is to read people, admitting he isn't sure if he was just blind to his family's pain or actively avoiding it. But seeing Diella's radical change has inspired him to finally change his own life, offering a warm, genuine smile to the tutor and saying, "This is thanks to you, Derek," as Derek looks on, silently appreciating the rare moment of sincere connection. Then Derek shifts the topic, pointing out that Diella's magic felt entirely unique, asking if Derek had noticed how her casting process felt almost like drawing a picture, which makes the commoner wizard realize the boy is a genius himself for catching on so quickly. Derek confirms it, explaining that she belongs to the rare school of the wild, where each mage's connection to mana is deeply personal and entirely fluid, meaning that once she hits her stride, she won't need any further teaching, and any attempt to micromanage her would only hold her back, promising that her moment to truly shine is just on the horizon. Just like that, 2 full months fly by in peaceful tranquility, until a maid brushes Diella's hair and places a beautiful arrangement of fresh flowers on the table, explaining that they bloomed so beautifully she couldn't resist bringing them in, prompting Diella to hold them close and breathe in the sweet scent of a long-awaited spring. The young lady smiles, reflecting on how easily she uses her magic now and how close she's grown to the servants, realizing with a touch of melancholy how much joy she had missed out on in her past life, and happily crediting Derek for changing her entire world. The maid smiles warmly, asking if her immense happiness is because today is magic lesson day, sending Diella into a flurry of excited, blushing denials, as the maid gently pins the vibrant petals into her hair. Diella eagerly asks for one extra flower so she can present it to her beloved teacher, but the bright dream instantly shatters as the delicate stems tumble to the cold floor, leaving her standing frozen and trembling in the middle of her room, her eyes filling with tears as she asks her tutor what he could possibly mean, while Derek stands in the open doorway, his posture completely rigid, staring down at the devastated young girl, before our star lecturer delivers the chilling final verdict. There is absolutely nothing left for him to teach her, because just like the brutal turning of the seasons, no winter lasts forever, and no spring can remain eternal, leaving only a single broken flower to wither away in the darkness. And with that, the stage is set for a dramatic departure. Inside the quiet, shadow-drenched study, our white-haired wizard explains that Diella belongs to the School of the Wild, where her natural magical instincts are exceptionally powerful, meaning that any further interference on his part would only end up breaking her wings, which the Duke quietly accepts, acknowledging that their contract must now come to an end. The older man strokes his bearded chin in deep contemplation, before rising from his heavy wooden desk, admitting that our stoic tutor has brought incredible change to his household and helped his young daughter grow in ways he never thought possible, lamenting that his own obsession with territorial management made him a terrible father, before turning toward the window with a look of profound relief. He asks when the departure will be, prompting Derek to explain that he plans to hitch a ride in Lady Azeline's carriage when she heads back to Ebelstein, which leads the Duke to request the immediate return of the library key, even though our pragmatic scholar was hoping to hand it over through the head butler after returning his books. The Duke steps back, insisting there's no need for delay, as he gestures toward the heavy key in his hand, leaving Derek with no choice but to comply, before being dismissed from the room with a cold, formal nod. A red-eyed wanderer looks somber as he steps out, giving a deep, respectful bow to his employer, and walking down the empty, echoing corridor of the mansion. But his quiet exit is abruptly blocked by Diella, who rounds on him in the hallway to complain about his sudden disappearance, forcing Derek to gently address her by name as they stand under the high ceiling during their final conversation. Tough facade instantly cracks as she quietly asks, "Can't you stay?" which makes the tutor hesitate in heavy, painful silence, before explaining that he must return to his life as a wandering mercenary and study more magic, promising her that once she hones her skills and enters high society for her debutante, where her sadness will have blossomed into true power, they will definitely cross paths again, and he'll have even greater spells to teach her. Diella turns her head away, muttering a tearful "You're annoying" to hide her breaking heart. At night, while the full moon hangs high over the silent Duplain mansion, Diella is tossing and turning in her bed, sweating and gasping from a horrific nightmare, where dark, faceless shadows whisper cruel insults about her being a useless, talentless child, taunting her as the absolute shame of the prestigious Duplain lineage, as she weeps in terror during the mental assault. Her blue eyes pop open in pure panic, as she sits up with a startled gasp, screaming a desperate denial into the empty dark room, clutching her sheets while catching her breath. She holds her head in her hands, desperately reminding herself it was just a bad dream, when her maid Elpin suddenly bursts through the door to check on her, looking terribly worried as she asks if the young lady is all right. Diella sits in stunned silence, wondering if she should go back to throwing tantrums and slapping servants just to create a pretext for her presence, clasping her hands in anxiety as she considers falling back into her old destructive habits, only to realize with a heavy heart, as the maid gently repeats her question and peers closely at her silent mistress, that behaving like a monster won't actually make her valuable. So she puts on a brave, bright smile and reassures her maid that everything is fine, resolving to keep pushing forward on the path of a true lady. As the morning sun rises over the quiet estate, Derek stands by the carriage, agreeing to let Azelin drop him off near the commercial district, while the elder sister smiles and tells him to go say his final goodbyes, prompting the white-haired wanderer to look down with a quiet, pensive expression. He walks over to a small group waiting nearby, where Linus Belmeard and his sister stand ready to send him off. Linus pats his shoulder, admitting that living in the mansion couldn't have been easy and promising to help if he ever needs anything, which Derek acknowledges with a grateful, polite nod. But Ellen Belmeard is staring at him with a stony, silent glare, her arms crossed as she tries to hide her mounting panic, before she suddenly blushes and snaps, "Did you think I was going to beg you not to go?" insisting with a flustered look that she is definitely not a child anymore. Eric smiles, stating it was a true honor to teach her, and hoping she will always remember their magical lessons, which makes Ellen smirk as she proudly declares she will tell the whole world he was her master, teasingly warning him that he'll never live in peace again now that he's the tutor of the great Diella Duplain. Our stoic tutor listens in amused silence, as Ellen's teasing mask quickly drops, pleading with him to stay safe and not do anything pointlessly dangerous, blushing furiously as she reiterates that she can take care of herself. Derek repeats those words in his head as he watches her, feeling the heavy weight of her earnest concern, which triggers a fleeting memory of his former mentor Keisha wrapping him in a warm embrace, whispering for him to always take her words to heart, leaving him standing in a moment of pensive, silent reflection. He is pulled back to reality by the sound of Diella calling out, and as she approaches, Derek reaches out and places a gentle hand on her head, softly telling her, "You don't need to become an adult so early." Yella's eyes instantly well with tears as those perfect words pierce through all her armor, and as the carriage finally begins to roll away, she runs to the edge of the path, waving her hand frantically with a bright, tearful smile and shouting, "See you again," keeping her eyes locked on his departing figure, smiling through her tears as she bids her first true friend farewell. Some time later, the carriage rolls into the bustling, chaotic streets of the Ebelstein commercial district, where a brutal punch immediately splits the air as a violent street brawl erupts, watched by Derek under a deep, concealing hood, while bloodthirsty onlookers cheer and demand more bloodshed, as a helpless victim is continuously beaten into the dirt. Suddenly, a young woman with light hair spots him and shouts his name in disbelief, drawing our white-haired wanderer's calm and stoic gaze, as he silently reminds himself that he is finally back home in the slums. Things are about to get far more complicated, as a mysterious armored figure stands under the moonlight, readiness radiating from their dark gear as they prepare for battle. Gripping their glowing sword firmly, right next to a battered wanted poster fluttering in the wind, bearing a cartoonish, familiar portrait, and offering an astronomical $10,000 reward for our hero's head. Safe and sound back in Ebelstein, Derek takes a breather at his old haunt, Belden's Tier, where the tavern owner welcomes him home with a free cup of sweet honey wine, the exact kind of high-class drink the fancy nobles love to fuss over. Helen, his fierce blonde companion, leans in close, squinting to see if living like a pampered aristocrat made him even paler than usual. Honestly, the tavern owner is still convinced the entire nobility must have been out of their minds to hire him as a magic tutor. But our slum-born scholar keeps things low-key, calmly sipping his drink and insisting there really isn't much to say, even though Pellin is having absolutely none of his evasive noble act and practically begs him to spill the details. The tavern owner tells her to pipe down and keep drinking, trying to keep the peace before she gets too worked up. She just groans, complaining that she went through absolute hell covering all their dangerous mercenary work alone while he was away playing teacher. That prompts the barkeep to ask the golden question, wondering if those deep-pocketed nobles actually paid him well. And the kid with slum-hardened eyes just smiles, cryptically answering that he walked away with something far more precious than gold, as he places a gorgeous, gold-trimmed leather book right on the wooden table. Both of his friends gape at the pristine cover, immediately guessing it must be an incredibly rare 2-star spellbook, but our sharp-eyed commoner gently corrects them, pointing out it is actually a legendary 3-star grimoire. The barkeep's eyes nearly pop out of his skull as he shrieks, demanding to know if he stole it, since getting caught with such high-tier magic is an automatic death sentence. Pelline, on the other hand, is completely blinded by greed, screaming that she wants to steal one too and asking where he found it. He just sighs, calmly explaining that the Grand Duke himself handed it over as a parting gift. He grabs him by the collar, shaking him in pure disbelief and demanding to know if the Duke's family needs a highly skilled archery instructor. Once the chaos settles, our pragmatic tutor opens his new book and asks the barkeep if any mercenary requests have come in lately. He wants a light warm-up, like a standard monster hunt, confessing that his combat instincts have gone a bit soft during his peaceful days at the manor. The barkeep just snorts at that, pointing out there is a constant shortage of combat mages, meaning there is more than enough dangerous work to go around. Derek nods, determined to jump right back into the fray by tomorrow morning, with no intention of wasting time, wanting to sharpen his skills before the real trouble finds him. The very next day, they head out on a bumpy wooden cart into the wild, where a monstrous beast leaps from the brush, catching the blonde archer completely off guard, though they make quick work of it, leaving the creature pinned with arrows and bleeding out on the dirt. As giant spiders swarm them, our slum-born scholar weaves a blade of glowing blue light to slash them down, and while Pellin collapses in exhaustion, Derek just sits on the cart, quietly studying his complex spellbook. Once night falls, he trains alone in the wilderness, summoning a swirling vortex of raw blue energy to push his magical pathways to their absolute limit. He attempts to stabilize a volatile mana crystal, his hands trembling from the strain, until the concentrated force erupts in a blinding, violent flash, forcing him to dive backward as debris rains down around him like falling meteors, while a massive shockwave tears through the quiet pine canopy, collapses onto the grass, panting heavily, clutching a badly scorched and blood-soaked hand as the glowing diagrams of the open grimoire mock him from the dirt, proving that the institutional barrier to 3-star magic is as high and unforgiving as iron. The seasons bleed into one another, from bright summer days to the crisp, golden leaves of a swift autumn, and finally, the quiet, freezing snows of a harsh winter. Helen shivers by the tavern hearth, complaining bitterly about the absolute freezing weather. The tavern owner just laughs, admiring their youthful energy for marching all the way to the frozen Kent mountains and back in a blizzard. He wipes down the bar, noting they are the only crazies in town who would hunt a harpy and bring its severed head back through a snowstorm. A sharp-eyed commoner holds a warm cloth to his frostbitten, scarred cheek, admitting that a hot drink makes him feel human again. The barkeep mentions that while Derek deserves a long rest, a very specific and lucrative request has just come in for him. It pays extremely well and is incredibly easy, though it might be a bit of a diplomatic headache. The job was forwarded from the Rohill Mercenary Corps over on West Street, hired directly by the prestigious household of Count Belmierd. Apparently, they are looking for a commoner mage to act as a partner for live magic sparring, which is just a polite aristocratic way of saying they need a highly durable, moving punching dummy. All Derek has to do is stand there, take a few high society magical hits, and collect his massive paycheck. The next afternoon, he arrives at the massive, iron-reinforced gates of the Noble's District Magic Sparring Arena. Inside, an elderly, robed wizard is walking down the manicured stone path alongside the Count's elegant daughter, Elent. She asks who her opponent is, and her tutor casually explains they hired a commoner so she can safely practice her offensive spells. He stops dead in her tracks, staring at him in sheer disbelief, asking if he is seriously suggesting she just use a defenseless commoner as a living training bag. The old mentor just smiles, assuring her that the man is being paid handsomely, so she should blast him to her heart's content. Elent crosses her arms and scoffs, muttering that hiding cruel violence behind money is just typical, arrogant noble behavior. The tutor adds that this commoner isn't entirely helpless, as he is registered as a 1-star mage, though Elent points out that she is right on the verge of reaching 2-star magic, which represents a massive, insurmountable gap in power. Meanwhile, our pragmatic tutor sits on a nearby bench, calmly tightening the laces on his combat boots. He clears his throat and looks up as the sound of footsteps alerts him to their arrival. Elent looks him up and down, asking flat out if he is the opponent she's supposed to face. She stands over him with her arms crossed, exuding the effortless superiority of high birth. Our slum-born scholar rises smoothly, giving her his name with a polite but level-headed greeting. He offers a crisp, respectful bow to both the lady and her elderly instructor. She introduces herself, but frowns as the name Derek rings a distinct bell from the high society rumors she's heard lately. The tutor ushers them toward the field, though he mutters skeptically about how unusually young their hired sparring partner looks. Elent shrugs it off, raising her arms to stretch under the bright winter sun, before walking toward the center of the dusty arena as Derek watches her with an analytical gaze. Standing at her mark, she asks if he is at least familiar with the basic rules of a magical duel. Derek nods, confirming he understands the rules perfectly. She warns him to resist with everything he has, as she plans to end this match in a matter of seconds. He suppresses a sigh, telling herself that since she has to do this, she will simply blast him straight out of bounds with a rapid shockwave and get it over with. But Derek just stares back, asking her with complete sincerity exactly how much resistance she actually expects. She blinks, completely caught off guard by his bizarre and overly precise question. He explains that he needs to gauge his own output carefully, so that his defensive maneuvers are actually useful for her training. The old tutor shakes his head in absolute disbelief at the audacity of this commoner. Elent lets out a dry, irritated laugh, her pride thoroughly stung. She remarks that he has a remarkably bold way of speaking to his superiors, before snapping that he should just fight back with every single scrap of power he possesses. Our kid with slum-hardened eyes falls silent, his posture shifting into a perfect combat stance. He quietly accepts her challenge, his tone dropping any pretense of academic polite banter. His eyes narrow into a sharp, lethal gaze that belongs on a battlefield, not an academy courtyard, as crackling blue mana begins to gather around his outstretched palm. Far from the arena, under a massive full moon, a silent observer holds a single torch before a looming cathedral, as if waiting for the spark of change. As the spar begins, our sharp-eyed commoner looks up with level, glowing eyes, repeating his query about how much resistance he should offer, which only makes the young noble lady laugh in sheer amusement. Ellen Belmeard crosses her arms, looking down at him as she mocks his remarkably bold attitude. She commands him to fight back with every ounce of strength he has, expecting an incredibly easy victory. Derek meets her gaze with absolute, silent focus. As a surge of brilliant blue combat magic begins to radiate from his form, and he quietly agrees to her terms. A brilliant crackle of blue mana illuminates the sky above them, as the two opponents square off in the center of the vast, dusty arena. Ellen channels her own high-tier magic, her hand glowing with intense offensive power. She acknowledges his impressive feat of mastering 1-star magic at such a young age, but silently fumes at his insufferable arrogance. He is determined to teach this commoner a painful lesson about the absolute wall that separates their social ranks. As her shimmering, high-class magical aura flares to life, she leaps high into the air, unleashing a volley of swift magical projectiles from above. Our slum-born scholar tracks the incoming barrage with razor-sharp intensity, standing his ground as he prepares to counter her opening strike. He deflects the massive explosion with effortless precision, leaving Ellen staring down at him in sheer, speechless astonishment, while Derek calmly analyzes the aftermath without breaking a sweat. He coolly asks what her next move is, which drives Ellen's irritation through the roof as she grudgingly admits he has the skills to back up his confidence, though she insists that raw talent cannot bridge the massive chasm between their classes. She summons a deadly array of glowing magical spears that hover menacingly in the air, gesturing smoothly to aim the high-speed projectiles directly at his chest. She declares that this final strike will end the duel instantly, diving downward with a look of fierce determination as her magical spear streaks through the air like a bolt of lightning. But her jaw drops as Derek deploys a precise, counter-offensive shield, causing their magical projectiles to collide and shatter in midair, erupting into a violent shower of bright sparks. As the final glowing shard streaks down and bursts, Ellen stands frozen in absolute shock, staring at the aftermath of the flawless clash. He recognizes that his defense is just a basic, low-tier spell, yet she is deeply unsettled that a commoner can control his mana with such surgical, microscopic precision. Watching from the sidelines, the elderly mentor muses that his reputation as a veteran mercenary is certainly no joke, as Ellen openly admits that she completely underestimated her opponent. She declares she is taking off the kid gloves to fight him seriously, her entire body erupting in a towering, violent vortex of blazing magical flames. Our slum-born scholar notes that she has completely changed her tactical approach, realizing that instead of targeting him directly, She is planning to obliterate the entire arena floor. He is genuinely impressed by her quick adaptability, which is highly unusual for a sheltered noble. Ellen raises her hand as golden magical spears begin to materialize out of thin air, calling down a massive, shimmering rain of high-impact projectiles. The golden spears streak downward across the arena like falling stars, blanket bombing every single inch of the stone floor. An immense, towering dome of golden weapons arches directly over him, and as Derek looks up at the inescapable grid of destructive power, he calmly notes that dodging this massive area of effect attack is completely out of the question. He instantly manifests a glowing, concentrated blue barrier to anchor himself, as the massive golden spears rain down with deafening speed, slamming relentlessly against his shimmering circular shield. Secondary, dark-tinged magical force sweeps back across the arena toward Ellen, erupting right before her in a violent burst of concentrated dust and debris. As the smoke clears, our sharp-eyed commoner stands his ground, his eyes locked on her position, but he suddenly flinches as a new threat breaks through the haze. Ellen lunges directly through the smoke screen, her hand manifesting a razor-sharp blade of light. He realizes she is executing a point-blank ice spear technique at a distance too close to dodge or block. He silently applauds her terrifying natural genius, before snapping his fingers to release a pre-prepared counterspell. A blinding, explosive flash of white light completely engulfs the battlefield, forcing Ellen to stumble backward as her vision is completely whiteout blinded. She recoils in utter confusion, her magical momentum ruined, as she curses his dirty, street-fighting tactics and shields her burning eyes. She is blown backward by the kinetic force of the flash, stumbling helplessly, frantically shouting and demanding to know where he disappeared in the blinding glare. He forces herself to focus, relying entirely on her acute hearing to track his movements, standing perfectly still to pinpoint his exact position on the stone floor. But a silent, glowing projectile streaks soundlessly through the air toward her cheek, and she gasps in shock as it grazes past, realizing she didn't hear a single footstep or hum of magic. Through the lingering haze, Derek slides smoothly across the field, surrounded by a fleet of silent, floating blades. He unleashes another glowing arc of silent, curved energy, causing her to flinch as the razor-sharp magic sweeps dangerously close to her throat. He calmly explains that he deployed a sound-dampening illusion-type spell, leaving her stunned that he accurately predicted her strategy and instantly countered her senses. She suddenly realizes his first missed shot was a calculated move to test her hearing. Before she can recover, a sharp sonic slice cuts through the quiet air as Derek commands his entire array of floating light blades to converge on her position. She screams in defiance, raising a rapid defensive dome just in time, as the silent projectiles shatter violently against her solid shield. She grits her teeth, focusing every shred of her remaining mana to counterattack, firing a swift, singular magic blade straight through the dusty gap. But our pragmatic tutor is already charging forward, closing the distance like a seasoned hunter, leaving Ellen panicking as she realizes he is within hand-to-hand combat range. She smiles fiercely, shouting that rapid magic casting is her absolute specialty. She watches his hands intently, waiting for the split second he tries to channel magic, confident she can manifest her spell first and blow him away. But Derek's boot slams heavily against the stone floor, using the sheer kinetic momentum of his charge to vault himself off a nearby wall, leaving Ellen staring in utter bewilderment at his impossible agility. As his glowing boot impacts the tiles, a violent current of lightning magic floods the ground, and she is instantly thrown off balance as the electrical discharge travels up her legs, leaving her to realize with horror that he didn't channel magic through his hands at all. He is casting direct, high-level combat lightning straight through the tips of his toes, as she screams in agony from the sudden, crackling shockwave. The old mentor watches from behind, utterly fascinated by the unconventional combat style, murmuring that Derek must belong to some wild, unregulated school of combat magic, which makes his unorthodox movements nearly impossible for traditional mages to predict. Ellen sits heavily on the dusty ground, panting for breath as she looks up at him, and admits with a genuine, respectful grin that he is a highly interesting opponent. She confesses that she initially looked down on him as just another low-class mercenary, assuming his reputation was nothing but empty bravado. Derek stands tall against the bright blue winter sky, his expression softening slightly, as the two combatants stand face-to-face in the quiet, ruined arena. She offers him a warm, bright smile, thanking him for teaching her a genuinely valuable lesson about the unpredictable nature of magic. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the city, a mysterious masked figure in an elegant suit strikes a dramatic pose, as if preparing to make their own grand entrance. As the dust settles, our star lecturer lands a final spell, focusing his eyes with intense concentration which leaves Ellen staring at him in complete, wide-eyed shock, especially when the sharp ring of a handbell cuts through the quiet courtyard as the robed referee officially calls the match, allowing the defeated noblewoman to walk away while Derek lands smoothly, deeply bowing to offer a polite "Thank you for the match," leaving Ellen to ponder the exchange in quiet contemplation. As a maid attends to the exhausted young lady, she generously praises Derek's incredible magical talent. But our slum-born mage immediately shakes his head, insisting that her own reflexes are unlike anything he has ever seen, prompting Ellen to chuckle at the smooth flattery, while noting that he seems far too accustomed to navigating the noble world for someone who had to endure bone-grinding effort as a commoner to reach this level. Derek simply attributes his drive to the basic survival instincts of a mercenary, which earns him a warm smile from the lady as she sips her tea. She warns him to stay clear of the grumpy old magic teacher behind her, before expressing her excitement for the upcoming sparring match at the Rosia Salon, prompting Derek to reassure her that she has absolutely nothing to worry about. However, she admits she has no interest in beating small fry, as her true target is the brilliant Diella Duplain. Derek's gaze turns incredibly sharp at the mention of his future partner, leading Ellen to dismiss him with a soft laugh for talking too much. As our red-eyed tutor turns to walk down the stone path, she watches him leave while trying to place his familiar name, realizing she has definitely heard of this particular mercenary, the formidable Derek, before, as he makes his way down the quiet pathway, until a hand suddenly shoots out and grabs his wrist, spinning Ellen around like a heavy silk ribbon caught in a sudden gust of wind, causing Derek to tense up at the sudden confrontation, staring at the red-haired lady who corners him with a knowing look, before smiling confidently and asking, "The mercenary who taught Diella." Sitting before a crackling fireplace with freshly poured tea, she demands his help to defeat Azalin, which catches our star lecturer completely off guard, especially when she points out that Azalin has not yet reached the prestigious 2-star rank, meaning this upcoming magic spar is her absolute best chance to finally secure a victory. Eric quietly observes her fierce, burning, competitive spirit, which she freely admits is a much nicer term for her obsession, confessing that she once did unsightly things out of a pathetic, dirty jealousy that clouded her mind, even though no matter how much she gossiped or searched for flaws, Azalin only ever offered her warmth and understanding, leaving Derek to listen in silence. Setting his cup down with a firm thud, he asks, "Why are you telling me this?" She looks up with absolute sincerity, willing to expose her shame to earn his trust, as she has a vital question to ask him. Derek calmly invites her to speak, and she points out that since he worked closely with House Duplain, he must know exactly how powerful Azalin is, while also understanding her own current limits, which is why she needs his guidance. Staring into the flickering blue magical light of her ambition, she begs to know what she must do to win. Derek watches her in absolute silence, acknowledging that while Azalin's magical talent is truly astonishing, Ellen also possesses immense natural skill, suggesting that with enough refinement, she could excel. But our slum-born mage quickly realizes, by the desperate look in her eyes, that she is not looking for empty praise, willing to beg even a lowly mercenary for a real answer. Stares at her across the dimly lit room, holding back his words for a long moment, before leaning forward to deliver a crushing, brutally honest verdict. "You can't beat her." He maintains a cold, unyielding expression, leaving her momentarily speechless as the harsh truth sinks in, though her defiance flares up instantly, declaring that she will win even if it is completely impossible. Eric listens to her fierce determination, as she stands up and points out that he managed to transform the famously useless Diella into a proper mage, meaning he must have a way to make her victorious too, leading Derek to admit there might be a method, though he warns her that several major concerns are holding him back, sparking her curiosity, as she eagerly asks what they are. First, he asks if she truly knows how he trained Diella, flashing back to when he stood over the kneeling noble girl with a drawn sword, holding the cold steel right at her throat, raising the blade to push her past her limits. But Ellen dismisses the danger, insisting she will do whatever it takes, which leads Derek to bring up his second concern regarding his status as a mercenary. He assumes he is worried about the scandalous rumors of a noble lady learning magic from a commoner, assuring him that her ambitions are far too grand, aiming to make her name resound across the entire empire, which makes any petty concerns about social circles completely absurd, clutching her chest to tell him not to judge her sincerity over such trivial pride, as she knows exactly what matters more than reputation. Derek listens quietly to her grand declaration before bluntly clarifying, "I'm saying you need to pay me because I'm a mercenary." The absolute pragmatism leaves her completely stunned, blushing as red as a hot coal pulled straight from the hearth. Flustered, she quickly stammers that she will pay whatever exorbitant fee he demands, leaving our red-eyed tutor suddenly wondering why the room has become so incredibly hot. Recognizing her genuine resolve, he decides to match her sincerity with a truly merciless training regimen, completely unaware that a glowing, terrifying eye is watching them from the deep darkness, as a mysterious hooded figure looms beneath the full moon. Under a clear blue sky, the noble ladies gather to discuss the upcoming social circle magic match, where Ellen Belmeard eagerly prepares her strategy, knowing she must train harder than ever to stay ahead of her formidable peers. As the news of the upcoming gathering spreads through the garden, the surrounding noblewomen eagerly declare their attendance, praising Diella Duplain for her remarkable humility, while the sleep-deprived young lady simply watches them with her usual exhausted calm. Suddenly, a cheerful voice calls out to Ellen, who smiles elegantly as she turns to greet her companion, drawing the attention of the other ladies in the garden, who quickly decide it is far safer not to get involved in their high-stakes social games. As they discuss their preparations, Ellen is showered with compliments, being hailed as a blooming talent among the elite, though she politely insists she cannot let her guard down against such strong competition. When Aizelin mentions that her family has brought on an exceptionally qualified new magic instructor, the red-haired noblewoman notes how much trust must be placed in this mysterious commoner, before smugly pointing out that it is actually Ellen who has secured his services. With an absolute look of triumph, the gloating lady prepares to drop a bombshell, revealing that the instructor's name is Derek, expecting Aizelin to break down in complete frustration and despair, now that her family's former tutor has been snatched away. But instead of reacting with anger, our workaholic noblewoman is completely stunned, while Ellen continues to hold her hand and offer sarcastic congratulations, praising Derek as a truly dependable and trustworthy guide, which only leaves Aizelin blushing and thoroughly flustered, prompting the baffled rival to mutter that this was absolutely not the reaction she anticipated. As Aizelin quietly processes this bizarre twist of fate, the scene shifts back to the Duplain estate, where Diella Duplain is calmly sipping her tea until her friend asks if she should also hire Derek, sending the poor girl into a state of sheer, unadulterated panic, as she frantically waves her hands and begs her precious companion to avoid that brutal tutor at all costs. Back at the gathering, Aizelin is deep in thought, while her rival continues to gloat, asking if she finally understands what it means to lose him, before declaring dramatically, "He is mine, Ellen Alfini Belmuird's instructor." But Aizelin remains quiet, reflecting on how his notorious methods might actually affect her rival, just as Ellen notices the late hour and prepares to make a hasty exit. Hoping to leave a great impression on her first day, Ellen bids farewell, leaving Aizelin to watch her depart with a mixture of worry and amusement, while Diella silently prays that her friend survives the upcoming ordeal, knowing exactly how hard Derek pushes anyone under his care. Meanwhile, down at a local tavern called Belden's Tier, our slum-born mage is enjoying a drink with a companion while discussing his rapidly growing noble clientele, noting how convenient it is that he can conduct his lessons without ever visiting their private estates. When his friend questions whether it is even possible to defeat a genius like Aizelin, our pragmatist in cheap robes calmly replies, "It's not like it's impossible," explaining that a sufficient difference in star ranks can overwhelm even the most innate talent. Pull off this ambitious plan, Derek admits he needs a rather dangerous approach, asking his companion for direct assistance in his upcoming scheme, which earns him a look of absolute disbelief, until Derek stares back with unwavering intensity, forcing his friend to sigh over the sheer recklessness of the idea, though our favorite commoner wizard simply shrugs, declaring with cold confidence, "Reality is inherently dangerous." Their scheming is suddenly interrupted by a crying noblewoman, who wails loudly about being completely swindled by a group of clever con artists, as the scene shifts away from the noisy tavern toward the grand estate where the actual lesson is about to unfold. Standing with her arms crossed, Siren Melvarot welcomes her tutor, declaring, "We'll begin with the sparring lesson first." But Derek immediately lays down a punishing curriculum of 10 consecutive duels without a single break, prompting the fierce northern lady to stare at him in utter disbelief, though he insists this is the only way to gauge her true combat capabilities, which she begrudgingly accepts as a fittingly rough mercenary approach. Without wasting another second, Derek unleashes a wave of magical energy, putting her through an intense training loop that leaves her gasping for breath like a fish hauled onto a dry deck, before granting her a measly 10-minute break to organize her thoughts. Siren panics over the complete lack of remaining mana, but Derek coldly commands, "If you squeeze hard enough, mana will come out," summoning a sharp ice spear to demonstrate while demanding she manifest 10 more, forcing her to struggle through the agonizing process of drawing energy from an empty reserve. When she falters under the immense pressure, he ruthlessly orders her to manifest 100 magic arrows next, ignoring her desperate pleas, until she collapses onto the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, at which point Derek finally dismisses her for dinner. Seeing her completely spent, Derek calmly offers her the chance to quit, but the exhausted lady refuses to back down, scoffing that this is merely a simple test of physical endurance, which is nothing compared to the cutthroat social warfare she endured, just to survive in Ebelstein's high society. Acknowledging his own short-sightedness, Derek watches as the proud lady brushes herself off, defiantly claiming that today was just a minor warm-up, and that they should significantly raise the intensity, dismissing his current level of training as child's play. Hearing her bold claim, Derek smiles faintly, leaving her utterly confused as he focuses on her mention of tomorrow, only to remind her that they are not waiting for the morning, because their brutal evening session is about to begin right now under the starry sky. And as they square off in the quiet garden, the same mysterious, masked figure from before watches them from the darkness, surrounded by a crimson glow. Out in the estate gardens, our dark-haired instructor is pushing Ellen Belmuird to her absolute limit, demanding she fire off 5 more magic arrows even though she is already trembling. And when she grunts that her body is completely empty, he calmly reminds her that plenty of mana remains in her core before raising the target by another 10, sparking an immediate scream of protest. When her magic fails, they transition to a grueling running exercise where she can barely keep her feet moving, until she finally collapses into a garden chair, sinking into the cushions like a stone dropped in a well. Her tireless tutor checks on her condition as she tries to put on a brave face, and he pragmatically suggests that if it seems impossible, giving up is also an option. But the stubborn noblewoman forces a strained smile to claim she is barely even warmed up, only for him to immediately call for a sparring session while she stares in absolute horror. 2 weeks of this relentless routine fly by, leaving Ellen so thoroughly exhausted that she slumps onto a table in the garden and begs Denise Beltis to wake her up the moment their distinguished rival arrives. In her heavy, dreamlike exhaustion, Ellen imagines Aislinn looking down to ask why she is pushing herself so hard, prompting the tired girl to look up and confess that she is doing it because she wants to win, which only draws a quiet, unreadable look from the prodigy, who simply offers some gentle words of encouragement before the vision fades. The illusion breaks when Denise shakes her companion awake, announcing that Aislinn has actually arrived at the academy, and the elegant lady walks past with her hair blowing in the wind. Ellen quickly tidies her messy hair in a panic, hiding as she overhears the passing noble ladies chatting about a new clothing store, and once the crowd departs, she asks in surprise if her rival is already gone, sighing in relief that she was not caught sprawling on the table like a puppet with cut strings. She's completely unaware that the regal lady actually noticed her from the corner of her eye, and is quietly worrying if Ellen is truly holding up okay under all this intense pressure. Back at her residence, a maid brushes Ellen's hair and presents a gift box from the prestigious House Duplain, which Ellen examines with immediate suspicion before opening the package to find a collection of premium potions and a thoughtful letter. Recognizing them as expensive remedies to restore her depleted mana, her stubborn pride flares up, and she snaps at the startled maid to throw them directly into the trash, demanding that they be disposed of immediately so she never has to look at them again. Determined to continue her grueling regime, she asks if her commoner wizard has arrived for their morning lesson, just as the seasons begin to turn and the biting cold of winter settles over the territory, prompting Ellen to send out seasonal gifts and warm letters to the other families, sharing the quality goods produced by her family's lands to maintain her perfect social standing while she secretly grinds away in isolation. In the frozen estate garden, the unbothered wizard is quietly waiting and reading a book, turning his gaze as his exhausted student approaches through the cold air. And when he politely notes that she is early for her lesson, she cuts right through the pleasantries to demand they focus entirely on her training, asking him flat out for his professional assessment of her magical progress. Presses him for his real, unfiltered opinion after weeks of endless practice. But our star lecturer stays silent for a long, heavy moment before delivering the blunt observation that giving up is actually a good strategy too, standing there with his hands behind his back while he waits for the storm to hit, which instantly causes her to turn away in deep, burning frustration before she rounds on him to ask why he continues to offend her so deeply. Offers a calm, professional apology if his words sounded offensive, but Ellen fires back in a fit of pure, desperate panic, demanding to know how Aislinn can be beaten if she throws in the towel, and she tearfully shouts that she did not hire him just to hear him suggest surrender, letting all her built-up anger boil over in the quiet garden as she tells him to get lost if he is only going to waste her time with such nonsense. Covering her face in absolute distress as her composure completely crumbles, Slumborn Mage calmly explains that obsessing over victory may actually hinder growth, but she weeps that accepting defeat would make her too pathetic to bear, leaving him to listen stoically as she finally speaks her raw truth, confessing that she was always just a petty, shameful person who gossiped behind Aislinn's back, driven entirely by her own deep-seated jealousy, while she clutches her necklace tightly to stop herself from shaking. He tells her that he accepts her painful honesty, which allows her to fully admit how lacking and pathetic she feels, trembling with raw emotion as the heavy facade of the perfect noble lady falls away. And though they both know there is no logical reason for her to hate Aislinn, she is still left with a haunting question, wondering why this petty inferiority complex refuses to disappear from her heart. Crying bitterly before her teacher as she realizes that her torment is not actual hatred for her rival, but a deep self-hatred. This rivalry is far deeper than a simple desire to stand as an equal next to the top prodigy of the empire, and it was never really about beating Aislinn, since the target of all her intense frustration as she stands weeping in the sunset is actually herself, clutching her chest in agony because this grueling struggle is not driven by light jealousy, but serves as her only desperate escape from her suffocating feelings of worthlessness. Seeing her pain, our commoner wizard steps forward to tell her that they will simply have to win, looking down at the weeping girl with absolute determination. And as his eyes burn with a cold resolve, he makes a solemn promise to help her defeat Aislinn once and for all, leaving the noblewoman standing under the clearing sky as she looks ahead with a brand new fire in her eyes. Horse-drawn carriage travels across the golden wheat fields of the Belmuird estate, kicking up thick clouds of dust as the heavy wheels finally halt, stopping with a heavy sigh like a tired dog collapsing onto a rug, before an elderly man in a deep hooded cloak steps down to the ground, squinting through his spectacles toward the towering stone walls of the massive, grand Belmuird family mansion. Guard in a bright red uniform immediately welcomes the traveler back from Ebelstein, guiding the loyal butler Velmir straight into the foyer to greet Count Belmuird, who offers his guest a seat with a warm, welcoming smile, adjusting his formal red coat and glittering military medals, and eagerly asks how his beloved daughter Elent is progressing with her studies. Velmir quickly assures him that the young lady has been focusing entirely on her magic, prompting the proud father to boast that his treasure will surely surpass even me. One day, though Velmir secretly sweats because he mustn't mention that she's been learning from a commoner like Derek. The proud noble then drops a massive bombshell by announcing he is traveling to Ebelstein himself, planning to pay his daughter a sudden visit to deliver a special surprise gift, which leaves the old butler freezing in utter panic as he forces a weak smile, desperately wondering how on earth they can keep this secret tutor a secret now. Meanwhile, far away on the desolate outskirts of Ebelstein under a cold full moon, the massive stone gates of the nameless labyrinth loom in the dark, where our slum-born mage stands with his nervous party, while Trisha openly questions if it is really safe to bring Lady Elent here, although the veteran mercenaries trust that Derek must have a solid plan. Trisha panics when she realizes that Derek actually expects her to enter the dungeon, pointing out that she is completely unprepared for what lies beneath the ruins. But our commoner wizard explains that developing real combat instincts requires actual danger, promising that his hired mercenaries will stay close to keep her from getting killed. He reminds her that the upcoming sparring match is only a few days away, making this dangerous dungeon dive the fastest way to force her growth, as the group slowly approaches the glowing portal of the dark labyrinth, leaving Trisha to stare into the abyss with a sinking feeling in her stomach. They march across the damp stone floor of the ruins, guided only by the soft magical light hovering above our star lecturer's hand, while Trisha shivers at the eerie atmosphere of the ancient corridors, and Derek warns everyone to keep their guards up despite this being a low-ranked area. They press deeper into the silence until a sudden rustle echoes ahead, prompting the scouts to narrow their eyes in intense focus, as a mercenary whispers that a pack of goblins is closing in, while another warns that a massive ogre is creeping up right behind them, which Derek calmly shrugs off by asking if they can easily handle a single giant, prompting the greedy warrior to demand extra hazard pay for the trouble, which our star lecturer promises to negotiate only after they survive the ambush. Low growls echo from the thick shadows around them, as Derek peers into the darkness and spots the glint of hostile eyes, paralyzing Trisha with fear as she realizes these are not simple training dummies, but actual bloodthirsty monsters wanting to tear her apart, right as a screaming goblin lunges forward with a rusty spear, drawing our commoner wizard into instant action as he unsheathes his steel blade, while a dozen more green beasts rush the group from the narrow corridor. Trisha gasps at the sudden, overwhelming violence of the melee, but Derek barks an order for Pellin to provide Archer cover, raising his glowing sword to parry the oncoming horde, while another goblin leaps down from above with its weapon high, only for Derek to jump into the air and meet the beast head-on, while Trisha struggles to steady her shaking hands and aim her bow. Her magical arrow streaks through the dark corridor like a shooting star, flying straight toward the encroaching monsters, and pinning a charging goblin directly through its head with a sickening thud, while Derek continues his relentless advance through the enemy ranks, slicing cleanly through another monster in a single, fluid motion. Lands a heavy, explosive strike that sends the beast stumbling back, using his offhand to blast another green beast with a burst of flame, while Trisha keeps firing arrow after arrow with desperate precision, striking down multiple targets simultaneously to keep herself from being overrun, before collapsing against the cold stone to catch her ragged breath, only to freeze as a massive, heavy thud shakes the dungeon floor. Hulking, blue-skinned monster with glowing eyes steps from the dark, as a muscular mercenary steps up to block the giant creature, laughing and mockingly asking how much this big target is actually worth, flashing a confident smirk despite the terrifying size of the beast, which lets out a deafening roar that rattles the stone walls, swinging a massive wooden club down like a falling tree, while Derek moves to flank the beast and strike from behind, landing a stinging slash across its massive shoulder, while a stray goblin catches fire from the residual magical energy. Trisha looks up at the chaotic battlefield in absolute horror, realizing with terrifying clarity that these monsters are genuinely trying to kill her, staring at the carnage as sweat pours down her face, shaking violently with the realization that she could actually die here, until she spots another shadow moving rapidly through the dust. Eric shouts for her to stay focused because one monster is heading towards your direction, forcing her to spin around in a defensive stance, as a lone goblin lunges across the wet ground like a feral cat, sending Trisha stumbling backward in pure, unadulterated terror, convinced that her life is about to end right here in the dark, while Derek fiercely commands her to fight back, shouting that she needs to kill it, which breaks something deep inside her fragile pride. Desperate girl suddenly realizes the sheer weight of her past complacency, crying out an admission of how ignorant and foolish she has always been, weeping over the precious time she wasted running away from her limits, as the goblin closes the distance with its weapon bared, forcing her to finally confront the crippling inferiority complex she harbored, clutching her chest as tears stream down her face, wondering why she ever allowed fear to dictate her worth. She raises her head to face the lunging beast with newfound resolve. Tear-filled eyes suddenly burn with a fierce, unwavering determination, taking a deep breath as the monster leaps toward her throat, and channeling every ounce of her magical energy into her open palm, letting it erupt into a blinding, crackling light that rapidly shapes itself into a solid spear of pure mana, which she thrusts forward with all her might, shattering the dark like a flare fired into a pitch-black sky, while a mysterious, Silver-haired youth with piercing red eyes quietly watches the impact, as the magical spear impales the goblin directly through its chest, sending Trisha spinning through the air from the sheer recoil of her spell. Veteran mercenaries watch her display of power with silent respect, while Pelin lowers her bow, nodding in quiet approval, as Trisha stands amidst the dust of her magic, watching the last of the defeated goblins crash lifelessly to the stone floor, while she gasps heavily to reclaim the air in her burning lungs, her face covered in sweat and dirt but her eyes filled with pride, while the mysterious red-eyed youth stands over the remaining monsters, watching her, as Trisha firmly tells herself that she will never run away again, knowing that she has finally taken one step forward on her path to becoming a true mage. Under the quiet glow of a full moon, our slum-born scholar sits alone on the cold stone, unfolding a handwritten letter that takes him back 2 years, when his former mentor first departed Ebelstein. She writes of her new post teaching magic to a wealthy county heiress, a girl whose overwhelming passion keeps her busy. Yet her mind still drifts to the days she spent with Derek, walking through the city and teaching him magic that felt free, enjoyable, and completely unrestricted. Her, of all the mages she ever encountered, our sharp-eyed commoner was by far the most talented, leaving her to wonder what incredible heights he has reached since, longing for the day he can show her his magic once again, before signing off as Keisha Flameheart. Folded carefully, the paper remains in his pocket even weeks later, a detail his fiery red-haired disciple Ellen notices immediately, asking what kind of writing could possibly hold his attention for so long. Our favorite budget wizard simply replies, "It's a letter from my teacher," prompting a teasing smirk from the girl, who wonders what kind of saint could actually tolerate teaching a stubborn guy like him. But Derek merely nods, saying, "She's an excellent teacher indeed," which completely deflates her attempt to get under his skin, leaving her to mutter about her failed teasing as they sit together in the quiet alley. With only 2 days left before her high-stakes duel, he asks how she is holding up, and though she feels a wave of uncertainty washing over her, a fierce, determined smile breaks across her face as she boldly declares, "I'll win." Soon enough, the day arrives at the Grand Noble District Magic Arena, a massive stone stadium humming with the chatter of gossiping noblewomen who watch with curious eyes as Derek strides past the crowd. One of the ladies calls out his name, stopping him to exchange a few polite pleasantries before asking if the rumors are true about him tutoring the Belmered heiress. Our slum-born scholar confirms he is indeed training his disciples, but the noblewoman expresses concern, noting that the girl has looked utterly exhausted lately. She warns him that her opponent is formidable, yet our sharp-eyed commoner remains completely unfazed, staring back with a cool confidence that makes her pause. Simply advises her that no matter who she faces, she must "don't be too careless," leaving the noblewoman to debate whether Aizelin will easily crush her opponent, whispering about how Ellen has trained so hard she lost half her face's weight. Heavy footsteps echo up the stone steps, as the beautiful Aizelin makes her elegant entrance, drawing gasps of admiration from the crowd, while walking gracefully toward the arena floor. On the other side, determined leather boots march forward, as Ellen repeats her silent mantra of victory like a drumbeat, stepping out with absolute focus under the watchful gaze of a tense maid. Her jaw is set, her hand clenching into a tight fist, swearing she is absolutely going to win this fight. Standing by a pillar, Derek watches his student, who enters the arena with unwavering composure, ready to face her elegant rival. Aizelin offers a polite, formal greeting to the red-haired fighter, who responds with equal grace and respect. But as the pleasantries end, Aizelin's expression sharpens, and the playful atmosphere evaporates instantly. With a knowing smile, the battle is called to begin, and Ellen immediately drops into her combat stance, unleashing a violent swirl of bright orange flames. Her hands glow with intense heat, while Aizelin counters by gathering a massive, swirling shield of blue mana, forming a highly concentrated sphere of pure magic, which she fires across the field like a cannon blast. The blue energy streaks directly toward Ellen, who conjures a wall of burning magical spears in response, launching her counterattack with a fierce command. Surprised by the sudden defensive pivot, Aizelin looks up, as the flaming projectiles streak through the air, descending like a volley of burning iron from an unseen army, filling the sky with streaks of blinding light. Standing firm amidst the chaos, Aizelin prepares her defenses, as Ellen maintains her intense, fiery assault, conjuring even more weapons of light around her. Just like they practiced in the dark, suffocating labyrinth, surrounded by the blood of slain goblins where she panted for breath, exhausted but listening intently, as her pragmatic teacher bound his wounds, explaining the harsh reality of real combat. A sharp-eyed commoner looked at her with absolute seriousness, teaching her that once both sides run completely dry of mana, the victory belongs to whoever can squeeze out one last drop of sheer willpower. He reminded her of her proud lineage, knowing that the blood of the prestigious Belmered family runs through her veins, and with one final look of encouragement, he told her to believe in yourself. Back in the present, those words ignite her spirit, as she conjures a brilliant display of magic that leaves the spectators breathless, wondering how a student could possess such overwhelming power, as she thrusts her hand forward and commands her magic to strike. Unleashing her newfound power, the red-haired Ellen stands in a fierce combat stance, her eyes burning with determination, as she rains down glowing yellow projectiles on Azalin, who struggles to maintain her swirling blue magical barrier. The fiery constructs slam heavily against the shield, causing a massive, blinding explosion that leaves the crowd gasping in disbelief at how much Ellen's mana reserves have grown under Derek's harsh training. As the thick smoke begins to clear, Azalin stands firm, watching the residual energy dissipate along the arena floor, confident that such reckless, high-yield blasting will quickly drain her opponent's reserves. Her glowing blue eye locks onto a sudden movement in the dust, and spotting her target, she channels a sharp spear of dark magic, shouting, "Now it's my turn, Lady Ellen." She thrusts her hand forward, unleashing the projectile like a bullet through the haze. But Ellen lunges forward, dodging the strike, only for another blue streak to tear right past her, forcing her to weave through the magical crossfire. Azalin gasps in sheer shock, realizing that she is looking at illusion magic. Stunned by the high mana cost required to manipulate such lifelike decoys, she barely has time to react as Ellen prepares her next strike, forcing Azalin to brace her defenses, her mind racing as she tries to find an opening. Magical spear comes crashing down from above, which Azalin narrowly avoids, recalling a tactical briefing with our slum-born scholar inside a carriage, where he explained the perfect strategy of overwhelming a target's vision with fire before using illusions, followed by a flurry of close-range ice spears to break their composure. A sharp-eyed commoner had warned her that their opponent isn't just any skilled mage. In the arena, the battle rages on with terrifying speed, as Azalin finds herself cornered by sharp ice spears at point-blank range, leaving her no time to deploy defensive shields, forcing her to rely on raw reflex to leap away from the deadly spikes. He falls backward, channeling a massive counterburst from the air, shattering the stone floor as she lands to create distance, while Ellen looks up through the dust, moving like wind to dodge the shockwave. Azalin stares in absolute disbelief, seeing her rival stand completely unscathed, her eyes burning with an intense focus. Our favorite budget wizard's advice echoes in Ellen's mind, warning her never to let her guard down, and now she understands exactly what he meant. Bracing herself for the next exchange, Azalin prepares her magic, her feet sliding across the stone as she charges her mana. Thick forest of sharp ice spears erupts from the ground, encasing Azalin in a deadly, freezing defense, ready to rain down upon her opponent. Ellen watches the massive array of ice weapons, while the gallery murmurs in awe at such high-level spellcasting without any incantations. Watching silently from the shadows of a pillar, our slum-born scholar smiles faintly, whispering, "She took the bait," as Ellen reacts to the freezing onslaught. Though Azalin recognizes her rival's incredible growth, Ellen is already fueling a counterattack, as a glowing sphere of golden magic manifests high above the ice spears. Azalin challenges her to block the coming strike, as blinding light pours down on the arena floor, but Ellen's eyes remain sharp and focused. With a wave of her hand, she ignites a fiery blast, sending waves of burning energy through the sky, streaking directly toward the frozen defenses. Watching from the sidelines, even the spectators look on in shock, their eyes wide at the sheer ferocity of the clash. Magical shards shatter in a deafening explosion, as a single, hidden flame arrow pierces clean through the ice storm, forcing Azalin to brace herself against the violent shockwave. She panics, unable to comprehend where a flame arrow came from, having felt absolutely no spell incantation or flow of mana before the strike. She desperately tries to piece together the trick, realizing Ellen must have concealed a single flame arrow during her initial opening blast, specifically saving it for this exact moment of vulnerability, as she barely dodges the explosive impact. Ellen stands confident, ready to press her advantage, leaving Azalin completely unable to read her movements, terrified of what unexpected trick her opponent might pull next. The noble crowd whispers in absolute amazement at how a commoner's student is fighting on equal footing, while Ellen grins, knowing she can actually win, feeling the thrill of finally overpowering the genius Azalin. Cornered and desperate, Azalin realizes she cannot win under these conditions, her breath catching in her throat, as she takes a slow, deep breath to steady herself. Her gaze turns cold and serious, while Derek watches from the sidelines with crossed arms, whispering that this is where it really starts, as the real battle finally begins. We start with a memory of the exhausted red-haired challenger catching her breath on the training grounds, where our slum-born mage stands over her with a fresh water skin and a rare moment of gentleness. Clutched in her trembling hands, the leather bag feels heavy, matching the weight of her doubts as she asks if a few weeks of training are really enough to defeat the house's star daughter. Derek doesn't hesitate, assuring her that a victory is absolutely coming, though he adds a mysterious caveat about the specific kind of win she should expect. Back in the terrifying present, the crowd of noble spectators gasps in disbelief as a searing, massive fireball ignites the sky, leaving Ellen absolutely paralyzed by a spell she never could have anticipated. He throws a frantic look toward her tutor in the distance, but the pragmatic tutor just stares back with a face as still as stone, screaming at him to stop looking so smug and actually help her. Ellen looks up to find the blazing miniature sun looming directly overhead. The intense heat of the high-level magic distorts the air, drawing a raw cry of panic from her lips as she frantically calculates her defenses, realizing standard ice barriers will melt like butter. It feels like a brutal reality check, a crushing reminder that some walls are just too high to climb. The gap between them feels like a canyon, but before the despair can take root, the spell rushes down, guided by Azalin's unwavering, icy focus. The onlookers shield their eyes as Ellen is violently thrown backward, swallowed by a massive, roaring explosion that tears up the dirt. The sheer force of the impact leaves everyone wide-eyed, expecting to find a scorched, defeated challenger in the crater. But Ellen rolls through the blast, using the momentum to escape. She slides hard across the grass, battered but unbroken, while her exhausted opponent stands panting heavily in the smoke. Merging from the dust cloud, Ellen's survival leaves Azalin utterly stunned that anyone could dodge such a direct strike. Watching from the sidelines, our star lecturer realizes Azalin copied his rapid casting formula, a brilliant but desperate play she pulled off after seeing it only once. It is a move born of sheer talent, but zero real combat experience, leaving the noble lady completely drained of energy. Her trembling hand betrays the massive toll of the high-star magic, which devours a mage's inner reserves like a starving beast. Yet Derek knows this extreme effort is Azalin's way of honoring her rival's growth. It is the ultimate display of respect on the battlefield, pushing Ellen to find a strength she didn't know she possessed. Refusing to let that respect go to waste, Ellen rises and shifts back into her stance, realizing exactly what her tutor meant by surviving the storm to find a path to victory. A swirling vortex of flame begins to gather in her palm, rising high into the sky as she channels her remaining strength, shouting her defiance across the training field. With a final, agonizing surge of mana, she grit her teeth through the burning strain, unleashing a blistering counterattack that races down toward her rival. The crowd gasps as a second massive fireball enters the fray, moving with a terrifying, unpredictable speed. Ellen charges forward, dodging the crossfire with agile, desperate leaps, keeping her opponent constantly off balance. She weaves through the falling embers, hitting a neat acrobatic roll to dodge another blast, and launching herself into a high flip through the air. A brilliant arc of magical light cuts through the dust, detonating in a spectacular burst of raw energy, which sends Ellen floating backward in a protective sphere. Catching her breath, she wipes her brow, her body screaming for rest but her mind sharper than ever. Her fingers glow with a bright blue light, shaping a spell to mask her attack's trajectory, as a cluster of glowing crystal shards manifests around her. She abandons all defense to save her precious mana, demanding to see how her exhausted rival will respond, as she fires a massive beam of concentrated magic straight up. The name of the noble lady echoes across the clearing, finding Azalin kneeling on the ground in complete exhaustion. The blue magical energy tears through the sky, hovering over the defenseless noble like a guillotine. The crowd realizes Azalin spent every drop of her mana on those initial fireballs, leaving her completely open as Ellen closes the distance. Azalin struggles to breathe, her vision swimming, while our clever commoner quietly notes that the end is finally here. Victory is within Ellen's grasp, having successfully cornered her idol, and she looks back with a proud, triumphant smile. Standing tall, she knows her rival is completely out of juice, while she still has enough mana to cast 2 more spells. It is more than enough to claim the crown, but as she prepares the final, decisive strike, her eyes suddenly widen in absolute shock. Sudden, violent blast of energy throws her backward, sending her rival falling through a storm of shattered crystal. In the quiet, luminous depths of her mind, the challenger pictures her rival, who always stands perfectly poised in a field of glowing flowers, the ultimate symbol of noble elegance that no one can ever hope to match. As Azalin walks through that flawless, light-filled paradise, Ellen can only focus on her own reflection, feeling her identity completely swallowed by the other girl's brilliant shadow, her eyes burning with a quiet, desperate envy, as she looks down at her own elegant but empty ornaments, watching her idol drift further and further out of reach. Cruel voices from her past seem to whisper from behind her, demanding she turn around and face the ugly truth, waiting to see if she will throw a pathetic, frantic tantrum. The harsh judgment of high society looms over her, while Azalin just smiles back with a warm, effortlessly pure grace. Finding herself standing alone in the middle of a dark, cold lake, Ellen feels the dark tendrils of her own insecurity wrapping around her ankles, pulling her down into the heavy shadows of self-doubt. The murky water slowly rises to claim her, dragging her under the surface and plunging her deep into the suffocating abyss of her own inferiority. Tangled in the dark vines of her resentment, she sinks deeper, yet even in the dark, she sharpened her blade, whispering to herself that one day she would rise to prove she is the better person. But as she struggles against the cold grip of her shadow, she looks back at the reality of the training grounds, where Azalin is kneeling on the dusty earth. Seeing her elegant, noble rival covered in dirt and with disheveled hair, even after rolling on the ground in front of the entire academy, Ellen is struck by how her rival can still look so dignified, standing tall even in defeat. It is a crushing revelation that pierces her to the core, even as the crowd screams for the fallen star to get back up. Holding a flickering flame in her hand, Ellen looks toward her tutor in the distance, remembering how our slum-born mage promised her that victory would be hers. But standing on the dark water of her own mind, she realizes that even if she wins this duel, she will still be trapped in this miserable, suffocating place. Back in the real world, Aizelin braces for the final blow in panic, her hand glowing with a desperate, last-ditch defense, only to look up in absolute shock as Ellen drops her hands and announces she has run out of mana. Stunned by the sudden surrender, Aizelin can only utter a confused gasp, listening as her rival politely bows and admits she was simply no match. Conceding the duel with an air of quiet finality, Ellen offers a gentle smile and calls it a wonderful sparring session. The crowd erupts into wild cheers, celebrating the noble lady's victory, while the red-haired challenger walks away with a peaceful expression. But Aizelin stands frozen, her wide eyes filled with a hollow, crushing confusion, as her classmates rush to shower her with praise for her incredible performance. The empty compliments taste like ash in her mouth, while Ellen slips away from the crowd toward the shadows of the arcade. Our clever commoner stands waiting in the quiet corridor, asking his student if she got a clear look at her rival's face. Ellen lets out a soft, teasing laugh, claiming she wanted to teach her a lesson. But as she describes the noble lady's stunned expression, Derek looks down, gently asking how the experience actually felt. He tries to maintain her playful facade, joking about how wide the other girl's eyes got, walking side by side with her tutor as she boasts about shattering her rival's composure. She insists it was a sight she will cherish forever, claiming a hollow sense of superiority that she desperately wants to believe in. She turns to him, asking if she did well despite the sudden ending, seeking some validation for her rapid progress, but her voice cracks as a single tear escapes her eye. He tries to smile through the pain, begging him not to find fault with her performance, but she gasps as the wall of her composure finally crumbles. Derek watches her silently, his gaze steady and calm, while she looks up at him with tear-filled eyes. He turns slightly, giving her space as she collapses against a stone pillar, hiding her face and whispering that she shouldn't be crying like a child. Our star lecturer speaks with absolute sincerity, telling her she did flawlessly. He stands tall over her crouching form, letting his warm words sink in, as she covers her face and weeps from the bottom of her heart. He finally admits the painful truth that she desperately wanted to win, but realized at the last second that a physical victory wouldn't change who she is inside. She felt like she would just sink right back into that dark, suffocating lake, forever trapped in her own miserable, jealous thoughts, because no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the bitter reality of her own mindset. She wept for the noble grace she could never seem to replicate, calling herself superior only in the depth of her inferiority complex, and turning her head away in absolute shame. Derek rounds on her, asking what does it matter if she looks a little pathetic, which startles her into looking up through her tears. He leans in, delivering a hard, essential truth. If you don't have the courage to look pathetic, you can't get any better. The powerful lesson echoes through the sunlit arcade, leaving her speechless. Meanwhile, the ripples on the training ground slowly settle, as the crowd departs and leaves the empty field behind. Aizelin walks away from the arena, her mind still reeling, her face pale and thoughtful under the weight of her hollow win. Her classmates offer their congratulations, thanking her for an exhilarating sparring match, calling her victory yet another incredible accomplishment for her family. They gush about the goosebumps they felt watching her cast such advanced magic. But Aizelin stops and turns to her companion, Denise Beltis, asking if she saw the truth of the match. Denise offers a polite, quiet smile, her sharp eyes showing she knows exactly what happened. She gently suggests that Aizelin's magic capacity is still far superior, but Aizelin shakes her head, admitting Ellen was ahead of her in every way. The terrifying speed of her rival's growth leaves her deeply unsettled, her mind immediately tracing the source of that power back to the mysterious tutor. The image of the commoner wizard lingers in her thoughts, prompting Denise to call over her maid Daisy, announcing that she must write a letter to her family's main house immediately. Her eyes widen with a sudden, intense determination, realizing they desperately need to secure the services of Derek. Somewhere in the quiet corners of the academy, a book is opened, holding secrets far more valuable than a simple burst of dopamine. A dedicated scholar pores over the pages in deep focus, while the pragmatic tutor closes his eyes in quiet contemplation, ready to face whatever political storm his genius tutoring is about to bring, knowing that the true value of any lesson is the hunger to keep learning. While the powerful families of the Empire hold on to their ancient secrets, a noble investigator stares at a document, demanding, "What is a 6-star travel pass doing in Ebelstein?" Puzzled by the sudden appearance of Sir Drest's movements, which forces the nobleman on his couch to review the customs agreement, leading the red-haired lord with the thick mustache to suspect that even the prestigious Count of Belmere is traveling to this remote corner of Ebelstein for the very same reason. In a world where a 6-star searching artist can read the flow of fate like a clock, a mysterious hooded figure stands before a glowing magic circle, just as the young heir of Duplain delivers a letter from his sister Aizelin, who is desperately seeking a competent magic instructor, and specifically requests the services of our star lecturer, even though the young man is currently employed at the rival Belmere estate. While the Duke contemplates sending his butler to negotiate a transfer, his blonde son dismisses the idea, knowing he must travel to Ebelstein anyway to track the mysterious Drest, promising to secure the commoner's contract personally while he is there. Meanwhile, Aizelin sits at a table under the afternoon sun, explaining to her exhausted companion that she needs a long break to clear her mind. She wonders if our slum-born mage will continue his work with the mercenaries, gently tapping her boots against his under the table, before leaning forward with a soft, searching look in her eyes. She looks him in the face and asks, "You'll come again if I call you, right?" Ready to guide her through the mysteries of the stars once more. Our sharp-eyed tutor remains quiet for a long moment, promising he will always answer her summons, even if he believes there is nothing left for him to teach her. Aizelin laughs at his sudden and uncharacteristic display of humility, smiling as she notes that the long, cold winter is finally coming to an end. Short time later, the heavy door of the mercenary tavern swings open, startling the rowdy patrons inside as the rowdiest of them shouts his name in sheer relief, welcoming the traveler back to his dusty home. Across the territory, a heavy carriage wheel spins over the rough cobblestones, carrying a wealthy patron toward a quiet suburban estate where a nobleman with a thick mustache peers through the glass. Inside the manor, his daughter Ellen lies fast asleep in her soft bed, her bare feet resting peacefully on the sheets, until she buries her face in a pillow to protest any morning lessons. She stumbles out of her bed looking disheveled and annoyed, muttering at her maid for failing to turn visitors away, only to see her father waiting in the hallway with a beaming smile. The older lord clasps his hands, calling her, "My pride, my jewel, my treasure, Ellen," standing in front of the master bedroom while Ellen gapes in absolute shock at his sudden arrival. She quickly plasters on a polite, dutiful smile, promising to change her clothes and join him in the parlor immediately. The adoring father waits outside like a loyal puppy before they sit down to discuss the details of her recent duel. Over a freshly brewed cup of tea, Ellen admits she learned a great deal from her rival, prompting her father to suggest keeping our slum-born mage entirely to themselves. The red-haired girl looks to the side in deep hesitation, worrying that the family vassals will object to hiring a commoner, though her father reassures her with an affectionate, confident smile. Far from the comfort of noble tea rooms, a dark cave mouth looms, its stone archway flickering with unstable magical energy. Suddenly, a young woman in a green cloak screams a frantic warning, as a shrieking goblin leaps at our sharp-eyed tutor from the shadows. Our star lecturer channels blue light through his fingertips, feeling a strange, violent friction in the air, which manifests as red electrical sparks dancing across his palm. Realizing he is on the verge of a breakthrough, he unleashes a powerful red blast that tears through the cavern, bracing his legs to anchor his weight against the pressure of a dangerous 3-star spell. A massive ball of fire hovers in the darkness, expanding rapidly as he shouts, "Fire wall!" which explodes outward like a shattered sun, engulfing the entire cavern in white-hot flame. His companion screams his name in terror through the smoke, fearing the reckless young man has incinerated himself. Later that night, the mercenary crew drinks to his narrow escape, while our slum-born mage sits in quiet contemplation, remembering the strange imbalance he felt before the blast, realizing he cannot force his way through the magical barrier. As he ponders this, heavy footsteps echo on the floorboards, and a weathered older traveler steps up behind him, staring at the young man with intense, discerning eyes. The legendary dressed Wolfietail asks for a strong drink to ease his fatigue, his stern face carrying the secrets of a lifetime of survival. Meanwhile, high above a noble courtyard, a young lady stands on a balcony weaving blue magical energy through her outstretched hands. The swirling light ripples beneath her feet, her eyes glowing with intense determination as she concentrates all her power to form solid projectiles, shaping the raw mana into glowing spears of light. She grunts under the massive physical strain, managing to manifest 5 shimmering weapons in the air, while the magical circles beneath her feet pulse violently, holding the delicate construct steady for just a second. Her strength quickly wavers, and the magical spears shatter into harmless sparks like cheap glass dropped on stone. Diella collapses onto the balcony floor in utter frustration, screaming in annoyance at her own limitations. Suddenly, a familiar voice behind her notes that her temper hasn't changed at all, making her jump in surprise as our sharp-eyed tutor praises her progress. She pouts and claims her success is entirely due to her own talent, until he mentions that her sister Aizelin wants to hire him next, sending the young girl into a panicked, protective fury. He warns her that Ellen Belmere is also competing for his services, leaving the young lady silent and thoughtful, before she admits that his harsh training actually made her a better person. Our star lecturer suggests that joining Aizelin might be her best option, smiling as he teases her about wanting to see him again. He turns bright red and stammers, "WH, who said I wanted to see him?" before kneeling on the floor to hide her burning cheeks, while the young wizard smiles, knowing his name is spreading across the empire. In the quiet darkness, a glowing blue silhouette of power emerges, as mysterious creatures gather under a starlit sky, waiting for the storm to break. As the darkness of night settles over the quiet streets of Ebelstein, the legendary explorer slowly drains his wooden mug in the corner of the tavern, while our slum-born mage watches him in silent disbelief, wondering why a legendary 6-star explorer has suddenly sought him out. and knows his humble name. Seasoned Master looks up with a quiet intensity, asking, "Could we talk for a moment? Just the two of us." Our hero nods in silent agreement, and they soon step out into the empty, cobblestone streets, where Drest observes that the young man's magical talent is incredibly ambiguous, despite the fact that his practical skills are remarkably outstanding. He looks at the youth and asks what he truly hopes to achieve by learning magic, prompting our star lecturer to admit he has no grand ambitions, only a deep curiosity to see how far his meager talent can carry him. The older mage listens with a calm, approving expression, before warning him that a commoner dreaming of higher realms faces a massive wall, gently asking, "Would it be all right if I helped you?" A sharp-eyed tutor stares back in absolute shock, remembering the legendary tales of this commoner-born genius who mastered the elements and became a beacon of hope for his people, turning his humble village into an ivory tower for poor mages, until the tragic year he finally unlocked his fourth star, and a brutal noble raid took the lives of his entire family, leaving him drowning in unspeakable grief and rage. While the corrupt lords toasted to their victory over the vulgar commoners, believing they had successfully crushed the uprising, the grieving mage resolved to execute his bloody vengeance. The execution was swift and merciless, as he slaughtered the perpetrators in their own grand halls, his eyes glowing with a terrifying green light, striking absolute terror into the hearts of the corrupt, as his glowing blade cut through their defenses like paper, leaving the powerful nobles bleeding out on the floor, their arrogant expressions replaced by wide, desperate eyes. One of them clawed at the ground in a panic, sobbing, "Please spare me," begging the cloaked specter of death for a mercy he had never shown to others, screaming in vain as his final moments slipped away in the dark. Cold shadow fell across the bloody chamber, marking the end of a corrupt dynasty. For 30 long and grueling years, the outlaw lived on the run from the imperial army, evading every trap an army sent to claim his head, until the crown finally acknowledged that his revenge was fully justified, granting him an official noble title to save their own face, as the weary elder knelt in the grand cathedral. Now our slum-born mage realizes the incredible weight of the offer, knowing there is absolutely no reason to refuse such a master, his eyes reflecting the burning determination to rise above his birth. Meanwhile, inside the grand Cleon Hall conference room, the high nobles of the empire gather to discuss the expansion of their northern territories, with the powerful Grand Duke Duplain offering his own forces for assistance. Rival Lord mocks his offer, calling his mercenaries lowly trash, igniting a sudden and terrifying pressure in the room, as the Grand Duke looms over the table with a dark, suffocating aura, suggesting that giving up their territory entirely might be a safer option, instantly silencing his terrified peers. Count Belmyrd laughs nervously to break the icy tension, suggesting they should all adjourn to visit their children, while the other lords note that his daughter Ellen performed brilliantly in her recent duel. The proud father smiles warmly at the praise, confident that with the right instructor, she will soon surpass everyone, revealing that he plans to secure our sharp-eyed tutor exclusively for his house. Rival Duke smiles slyly, warning him that if the commoner joins Azelin instead, Ellen will never have a chance to rise above her rival, leaving the Count with veins bulging on his forehead as he is accused of failing to grasp the young man's true, mercenary character. While the powerful lords argue over who will control his future, a young noblewoman lies in her bed reading a secret document, resolving to have her contacts investigate the mysterious commoner. Short time later, Count Belmyrd arrives at the dusty mercenary headquarters, startling the simple tavern keeper, as the wealthy lord demands to speak with the commander directly, annoyed that his formal letters have been completely ignored. Flustered commander apologizes and explains that our slum-born mage has mysteriously vanished after refusing all recent requests, sending the Count into a silent panic as he wonders if a rival house has already snatched him up, muttering, "I'll have to find him myself." Across town, the grand gates of the Veltus estate stand firm, where the clever Denise Beltus bites into a fresh red apple, calmly reading an urgent letter from her powerful father. She asks her maid when the message arrived, noting the desperate command to secure our sharp-eyed tutor immediately, while his market value is still relatively low, muttering that her father is always looking for a cheap bargain. She sighs in deep annoyance at the interruption, complaining that today is a very important day, the single moment she has been waiting for all season, which is the official release of her favorite trashy romance novel. She blushes intensely, wondering, what exactly is the ice greatsword, and cursing the timing that forces her to play the dutiful daughter, before calling out to her personal maid, Bella, to prepare her outdoor clothes immediately, ready to hunt down her elusive new teacher. In the silent darkness, a single black spider hangs by a thread, waiting for the web to tighten. Deep in the shadows of a massive mountain cavern, where frozen stalactites hang like jagged teeth, our stone-faced mercenary Derek sits on a flat rock with his mentor, who patiently instructs him to release his mana in a fine mist to sense their surroundings. Perspiring under the mental strain, our slum-born mage concentrates deeply, unleashing a swirling cloud of green magical energy that sends pulsing emerald ripples across the damp cave floor. As Derek wraps himself in this glowing aura, Dressed Wolfietail explains that this is the absolute foundation of search magic, which starts as simple threat detection at 1 star and upgrades to tracking locations at 2 star. While a complex blue magic circle materializes in the dark, the legendary 6-star explorer notes that 3-star mages can see through disguises, while 4-star users see through the opponent themselves. He adds that 5-star wizards read minds and speak to the dead, while the legendary 6-star tier grants the ultimate ability to see the future. Derek looks completely dumbfounded at this revelation, especially when Dressed reveals he saw the future himself, and that is why he sought Derek out. Our young magic scholar nervously asks what kind of terrible fate awaits him, prompting the older wizard to ask if he knows a man named Valerian. Dressed clarifies that Valerian is the eldest son of the Duplain family, and warns that before Derek even reaches adulthood, this young noble will plunge headfirst into the forbidden art of necromancy. With the stakes suddenly feeling incredibly real, Dressed delivers a chilling command. "You must kill him." Derek absorbs the shock in silent, heavy contemplation, before asking what exactly Valerian is planning and why he would turn to such dark arts. The weathered mentor sighs in regret, explaining that he cannot share any more details. He warns that the future is a fragile thing, and learning too much will only cause the days ahead to change in even more unpredictable ways. But as he prepares to leave Derek with one final grim prophecy, he looks him dead in the eye and says, "It's that you are destined to die." To his surprise, Derek does not flinch at all, dryly pointing out that being destined to die is very different from it being a complete certainty. The old man chuckles, agreeing that he certainly does not want the kid to die either, but warns that to survive, he will have to become strong. With those parting words, the 6-star mage begins to channel a massive spell, reaching his hand toward the sky as glowing particles gather in the air, demanding that Derek become overwhelmingly powerful. His weathered face glows in the blue light of the expanding magic, which shoots up toward the bright moon shining through the cave's ceiling. The swirling magical currents illuminate every dark corner of the cavern, leaving Derek standing alone beneath the moonlit opening, looking incredibly determined to carve out his own path. Meanwhile, back in the narrow, cobblestone streets of the bustling town, a horse-drawn carriage pulls up to the side of the road. As the heavy hooves come to a halt on the stone, the white-haired Lady Denise Beltis steps out, assisted by her loyal maid Bella. Denise tells her maid to stay behind and rest while she walks on foot, but as she strolls down the street, she notices some odd looks. She looks confused, asking, "Why is everyone staring at me?" Bella dryly replies that she has no idea, even as Denise continues her elegant, slightly haughty stride. Keeping her hands neatly folded at her waist, she does not notice Bella's concerned and critical glare. The maid flatly reminds her mistress that she usually lives like a slob who barely washes, messes up her room, and just lies around reading books, which makes her current elegant disguise highly suspicious, though Denise just laughs it off as a joke. Our romance-loving strategist quickly shifts focus, stressing that they must find Derek before another noble house recruits him. She confidently asserts that no matter how slow they are, they will still beat the competition. Bella points out her usual tardiness and asks why the mercenary went into hiding, prompting Denise to deduce that he wouldn't reject easy money unless something far more valuable appeared. He visualizes Derek using highly advanced, glowing magic, and reasons that for a young genius who can channel a massive spell like that, the only thing more precious than gold is magic itself. She guesses that he must have found an incredibly powerful teacher, which would explain why he has absolutely no time for mercenary work. But since he voluntarily walked away from the Duplain family, which is already a premier training ground run by a 5-star mage, she imagines him training under someone even grander. She concludes he must have found a legendary 6-star mentor, musing on who that could possibly be, until Bella interrupts her thoughts to announce they have arrived. They find themselves standing outside an establishment called Belden's Tier, where a goateed shopkeeper welcomes them warmly, before casting a curious look over his shoulder. The shopkeeper mutters to himself about how even noble ladies are now showing up, before telling them flat out that 3 teams have already searched for Derek and left empty-handed. But Denise smiles slyly, asking if the legendary 6-star mage Dressed Wolfietail was there, instantly causing the shopkeeper to gasp in absolute shock. Denise beams brightly, thanking him for the silent confirmation, and immediately tells Bella they are heading to the Coachman's Guild next. Arriving at the busy commercial district guild hall, Bella asks her mistress how on earth she deduced Dressed's involvement. Denise explains it was incredibly obvious that to interest a mage who walked away from a 5-star, you would need to bring in a 6-star, and since she knew Dressed was visiting Ebelstein, she simply took a lucky shot in the dark. She chuckles as she reviews the transit documents, noting the old man fell for her bluff, and looks up with a smug, playful grin, asking if she isn't incredibly smart. Bella delivers a dry reality check, saying she rarely uses her brain, so it's hard to tell. Denise leans back dramatically, sighing that she is utterly exhausted from being so incredibly capable. She complains that she wishes she could just be incompetent for once, while Bella wonders if she actually enjoys being talked back to. since she never listens to a word. Bella shifts to the real problem, asking how they can possibly recruit Derek when powerful families like the Duplain and Belmeard are after him. Denise grins confidently, telling her that recruiting him will be the absolute easiest part, playfully whispering that she has prepared a foolproof honey trap. She reasons that since he is a hot-blooded young teenager, he won't be able to resist her beauty. Bella brings her down to earth by pointing out that her main rival is the gorgeous Lady Azeline, sending Denise into a defensive spiral. She frantically asks if she isn't the prettier one. Bella ignores her childish whining, dryly noting it's the only thing she actually listens to, before suddenly spotting a crucial detail in the registry. She points her finger at the old parchment, tracing the ink lines of the travel log, and rests her hand on the page as she reads the entry, revealing that a boy wearing a travel robe checked through a week ago. The document points directly to Laspa Great Cave near Ramhole Hill. Deep in the dense forest on the mountainside, the massive mouth of the cave looms. Inside, Derek and Drest sit amidst fading magical energy, when the old explorer suddenly closes his eyes, sensing an approach. He informs Derek that visitors from House Beltis have just arrived, and tells him to head out and greet his guests. Outside, Denise and Bella wade through a shallow stream in the cave, the maid pleading to turn back and bring soldiers, but Denise flatly refuses to budge. She explains that moving soldiers would tip off the other houses, meaning they would do all the hard work just for someone else to steal the credit. Suddenly, Bella shrieks in terror and points into the darkness, where a pair of glowing red eyes peers out like a predator in the night. Denise instantly steps in front of her maid, wondering why there's a monster in a cave that was supposed to be completely cleared. Admitting she is terrible at offensive magic, she prepares to cast a spell anyway, stepping firmly into the water with a splash, as she concentrates her mana into a swirling dark bubble. She unleashes a bright blue light from her palms, while Bella cringes in fear behind her. Denise thrusts her hand forward, channeling her magical energy down her arm as the spell crackles in the damp air. But the glowing eyes belong to Derek, who easily steps into the light, dryly asking what brings Lady Denise to such a humble place. Denise gasps in complete shock, realizing this monster is the mercenary she was hunting, as he stands before them in the cavernous dark. She quickly recovers, a small smile playing on her lips, as she looks at him with a predatory glint in her eyes, declaring to herself that it is finally time to make this boy hers. She smirks, imagining how easily he will fall for her, striking a seductive, theatrical pose, as she curls her fingers in a playful gesture, confident that her brilliant honey trap will catch him hook, line, and sinker. She stands proudly by her maid, ready to execute her perfect romantic scheme. As Denise and her maid cautiously approach Derek in the dimly lit cave, our scheming noblewoman musters up her sweetest voice to ask if he is indeed Derek. A pragmatic commoner, Mage calmly confirms his identity, prompting Denise to flash a delicate, rehearsed smile as she sighs with dramatic relief. She coos that she had been dying to meet him, hoping to have just a single private conversation, which Derek dryly describes as a highly pleasant chat. Standing tall and unimpressed in his dark cloak, he watches as Bella struggles to hide a sudden giggle, instantly causing a vein to pop on Denise's annoyed forehead. Unwilling to back down, the young lady lightly lifts her dress and adjusts her stance, confessing that she has dreamed about him countless times. He compliments his incredible reputation as both a powerful wizard and an instructor, whispering coyly that she would be absolutely thrilled to be tutored by him. The stone-faced wizard ruins the mood by asking, "Why are you speaking in such a theatrical tone?" He flatly inquires if she is practicing for a stage play because of the cave's echoes, leaving Denise completely red-faced with embarrassment, while her maid snickers uncontrollably in the background. Realizing her fragile, beautiful girl act has failed miserably, Denise pivots to her next scheme, stepping even closer to the young mercenary. She claims she was deeply moved by the recent magic duel between Lady Azeline and Lady Ellent. He squeezes out fake tears, sobbing that she feels left behind by her peers, and clutches her chest in theatrical agony. She suddenly grabs Derek's hands, pleading for him to save her, and pulls herself close to his body, leaning in until her face is just inches from his. She gloats internally that he must be feeling her breath, confident his heart is racing and he won't be able to refuse her. But Derek swiftly yanks his hands away from her grasp, leaving our romance-loving strategist staring in utter disbelief. He bluntly points out that from what he has seen, she doesn't actually care about magic at all. He reminds her that when she mistook him for a monster, she frantically tried to cast an ice spear, which was incredibly clumsy, unorganized, and completely unprepared. He analyzes her raw mana capacity as excellent but completely wasted, as Bella mockingly gives her mistress a thumbs up in the background to agree that she never practices. Derek steps forward to deliver a harsh, cold warning, stating that she should never lie about sincerity to someone who is serious about magic. His red eyes flash in the shadows, as he warns that lesser mages would take her performance as an insult, leaving Denise looking genuinely shocked and vulnerable. He turns his back on her, flatly refusing to accept requests from people with hidden motives. Denise tries to stop him, but her voice falters as Derek tells her to find a highly ranked noble wizard who actually fits her status. He walks out of the cave, leaving her standing in complete silence. He stands alone in the dark cavern, pensive and humiliated, as the setting sun paints the distant mountains in deep orange hues. Walking back along the dusty forest path, Denise tries to salvage her pride, insisting that Derek is either totally impotent or just an incredibly upright person. She rants that she used her finest perfume and cosmetics only to be rejected, while Bella sighs and suggests they focus on writing to the main family instead. Denise snaps back in a furious frenzy, insisting she is absolutely not angry at all, forcing the tired maid to apologize to her clearly fuming mistress. Closing her eyes as she tries to steady her breathing, Denise opens them with a look of fierce determination. By the warm glow of a campfire in the woods, Bella asks her mistress if she is really going to be okay sleeping in a tent. Denise holds her head in frustration, muttering that if she backs down now, another family will steal Derek. As Bella gets ready to return to the mansion, Denise calls out to her, acting incredibly sweet as she asks for one final, crucial favor, demanding that she bring Volume 4 of her favorite trashy romance novel tomorrow. The next morning, the bright sun rises over the mountain forest. Inside the dark cave, Derek is sitting quietly, when Denise suddenly stumbles in, groaning under the weight of a massive wooden crate. He drops the heavy box of books, scrolls, and supplies with a tired sigh. The thick-skinned tutor raises an eyebrow, asking what all this junk is. Denise smiles warmly, closing her eyes to look completely innocent, promising that she only wants to support his training so he can focus entirely on magic. Derek stares at her coldly, stating flatly that doing this won't change his mind. Denise breezily responds that she doesn't care, and is happy just watching him work. Internally, she snickers that no human can resist someone who gives them constant gifts, confident that she will have the last laugh once he falls for her. A pragmatic commoner, Mage, accepts the heavy crate with a polite nod, but then immediately eats her bread while repeating that he still won't teach her. Over the next few days, Denise brings rare food and magic crystals, but Derek just takes them while refusing her offer. She even brings a professional chef to cook him a full gourmet meal, but our slum-born Mage happily eats it and says no. She nearly breaks her back carrying a giant refined magic crystal ore, only for Derek to grab it and reiterate his refusal. Furious and exhausted, Denise punches a tree trunk in the forest, sending leaves flying everywhere, screaming about what a selfish, shameless exploiter he is. But her tantrum is cut short when Bella rushes over, panting that they have a massive crisis. She warns that the head butler of the powerful Duplain family is marching right toward the cave. Panicking, Denise grabs her maid and dives into the bushes, leaving her campsite behind. A pair of formal, polished leather boots steps onto the dirt path, as the Duplain head butler leads a large squad of armed guards and maids into the forest clearing. Denise and Bella peer out from the foliage, shocked by the military-grade escort, as the butler enters the cave and presents Derek with an official contract. Derek looks down at the scroll offering him the position of magic instructor for Lady Azeline and immediately smiles, declaring that it would be an absolute honor to accept. Watching this from her hiding spot, Denise bares her teeth in a silent, explosive scream of pure betrayal and rage. Standing in the dark cave, Derek is handed an official scroll, which is a prestigious offer to become a magic instructor for Lady Azeline, instantly leaving Diella wide-eyed in absolute disbelief. The bratty noble girl lets out a silent, dramatic grimace, but before anyone can celebrate, the formal butler steps forward to ask if he will depart immediately, only for our hard-headed commoner to flatly refuse, announcing he will only after I finish my training. The butler tries to salvage the deal by offering a massive pile of cash, as Diella lowers her head in a quiet, apologetic slump. But our slum-born mage holds firm, declaring, "I do not wish to teach magic half-heartedly," leaving her to sink into a thoughtful, heavy silence. Meanwhile, inside the grand Duplain estate, the elegant eldest daughter Azeline turns around with a start, demanding to know if her scouted teacher has finally been found. A personal maid confirms that the head butler went to meet him, making the young lady sigh that she should have been told sooner, before ordering her swiftest guards to saddle up and ride out through the rough mountains, insisting that she must welcome her new master with her own 2 hands, as a proper student should always go in person. Back at the camp, the fire crackles softly in the dark night, where Diella is currently making a sour face, before telling her maid Bella that they are packing up and heading home tomorrow. Bella dryly observes that her mistress is wonderfully quick to quit, earning her an annoyed glare, as Diella asks if her maid secretly thinks she is a fool. She admits she usually fights tooth and nail for what she wants, but this time she has zero desire to be stubborn, especially since her maid points out that our sharp-eyed tutor is completely immune to noble names and money, and only moves for things he actually deems important. Bella looks up at the stars, leaving Diella to sit in the quiet glow, recalled to the memory of Derek's fierce devotion and his refusal to take on any half-hearted disciples. She remembers the brilliant, flashing magic of her flawless older sister and stares into the burning embers, wondering why on earth everyone around her is so painfully sincere, while a solitary gray stone rests on the dirt nearby. Suddenly, the small rock begins to tremble, rising slowly into the air alongside dozens of others. He turns to see Derek sitting in a calm trance, surrounded by a swirling vortex of blue energy, as the floating stones dance to his silent command. Diella steps forward to quietly apologize, smiling softly for the first time as she confesses she interrupted his practice. She asks to sit down beside him, noting that he looks a bit softer today, especially in his intense red eyes. She looks straight ahead into the dark forest and delivers a genuine, quiet apology for all the trouble she caused, staring down in deep reflection, before announcing she is officially giving up her search. Our slum-born mage keeps his eyes closed but softly thanks her, wishing her luck in finding a proper teacher, but Diella scoffingly snaps, "I hate magic," causing Derek's red eye to snap open in surprise. She explains it is all just acting and family politics, admitting she only pursued him because he became a local celebrity. But since he is far too proud and bound for Azaline anyway, she is stepping aside. Derek asks why she despises the craft. She recalls that she actually liked it once, before correcting herself and whispering, "I just like being praised." A memory flashes of her younger self casting simple spells to a roaring, clapping crowd, where magic was nothing more than a cheap ticket to get attention, pushing herself to study like a genius just for the applause. One quiet afternoon in the Grand Library, the young girl looked up in sudden, empty confusion, realizing she had absolutely no passion for it, and simply walked away. Our sharp-eyed tutor points out that anyone eventually grows tired of empty flattery, making her smile warmly at the fact that he is actually listening to her. He wishes her a safe journey home as she stares at him with her bright blue eyes, feeling a sudden wave of quiet envy, saying, "I'm jealous of someone like you, who never doubts the value of honest sweat and effort." She clutches her cloak tight, asking if he will truly become a legendary wizard, while Derek looks forward with a quiet, unreadable stare. She stands to leave, asking him to at least say hello if they ever cross paths again. The next morning, the bright sun rises over the horizon, while far away, Denise Beltis marches out of her family's territory. Diella rides back home with her hair dancing in the cool wind as the sun beams down on her family's towering castle spire. Back at the Grand Duplain mansion, Diella sits as her maid brushes out her hair, completely shocked to hear that Azaline was rejected by their cave-dwelling target. Her maid explains he is an entirely unpredictable creature, leaving Diella to wonder if he merely wants to finish his training first rather than giving a flat rejection. The maid suggests she forget all about him, joking that he will probably turn into a wild cave bear, while Diella wonders if the young man thinks he is the only wizard on Earth. Their butler interrupts to announce a special guest has arrived for breakfast, and as the heavy doors swing open, Diella steps in to greet her father, only to freeze on the spot as she sees our hard-headed commoner Derek calmly slicing into a juicy steak, happily dining with the Duke himself like he owns the place. The heavy dining room doors swing open with a sharp gust, as Diella enters with a bright morning smile, expecting to greet her father in peace. She suddenly freezes, her bright blue eyes widening in sheer shock, as she finds our dark-haired commoner Derek sitting there unimpressed, delicately chewing on a slice of prime steak right next to her father. He can only let out a small, stunned gasp as her mind reels. To understand how he ended up here, we have to go back to last night, inside the pitch-black cave, where Derek sat cross-legged, floating in a dense pool of brilliant blue mana. Sweat poured down his face as he concentrated every ounce of his willpower, guiding the wild currents of magical energy to align perfectly with his core, forcing them to compress tighter, converging the entire sea of mana into a single point. His hair whipped violently under the extreme pressure of the swirling vortex, his face contorted in sheer agony, until his crimson eyes snapped open, and he slammed his palm flat against the cold stone floor, unleashing a deafening, blinding shockwave of blue magic that shattered the silence. The young man knelt in the center of the settling dust, as spiderweb cracks rippled up the massive stone pillars and stalactites. The entire cavern hummed with the crackling residue of his power, leaving him slumped over on the ground in total exhaustion. He gasped desperately for air, feeling completely hollowed out, as a voice warned him that he would collapse if he kept pushing like a maniac. His weathered mentor, dressed wolfy-tail, stood over him in the dim light and announced it was finally time for him to leave, as the young man looked up through his messy bangs. Later, with fresh fish roasting over a warm campfire, Drest explained that he had nothing left to teach him for now, and that he must find his own path forward, as the seasoned explorer stared quietly into the dancing flames. He fixed Derek with a sharp, piercing gaze, his weathered face filled with solemn wisdom, warning him that mediocrity is a death sentence in the upper echelons of the Empire. He offered him a perfectly roasted fish, telling him to decide how far he intends to climb. Derek took the skewer, asking where his teacher was heading next, only for Drest to stand and wander off into the dark forest for some fresh air, before pausing to call out the young man's name one last time, delivering a chilling final warning, "Beware of Kohela." He then vanished completely into the shadows of the woods, leaving our straight-faced wizard to realize that his second mentor was officially gone. He sat alone in the quiet dark, repeating the name of the Empire's dangerous chief mage. Meanwhile, at the massive and opulent Veltis Grand Duchy mansion, Grand Duke Beltis is absolutely beaming, thrilled that a brilliant magic instructor walked in on his own feet. The sharp daughter Denise quietly sips her tea, playing along with her father's joy, while the Duke asks why on earth Derek turned down the prestigious Duplain house. Sitting with them at the long, luxurious dining table, our young slum-born tutor calmly states he only accepted because of Lady Denise's attitude, which her father immediately takes as a massive compliment, fawning over his perfect daughter. Claims no one could possibly resist her angelic charm, asking if she remembers the time she forgave a clumsy maid who shattered a plate. Starts recounting her sweet, noble words about valuing the maid's safety over China, prompting Denise to interrupt with a tight, sweating smile. He quickly suggests they focus entirely on the private magic lessons, insisting they discuss the details in absolute privacy. Once the Duke leaves, leaving the two of them alone across the massive table, Derek drops the polite act and asks what she is actually playing at. Denise retorts that they had a perfectly clean break and that she has no interest in learning magic. Derek admits he was grateful for her help back in the Great Cave, but she coldly dismisses it as a simple political transaction, crossing her arms to reiterate she will not be wasting her time with spells. Derek lowers his head, admitting her arrogant dismissiveness rubbed him entirely the wrong way, criticizing her habit of reducing everything to cold utility, leaving her sitting in a stunned, silent stupor. She glares at him with her arms tightly crossed, sarcastically spitting back that it must have been highly unpleasant for a grand purist like him. Scoffs at the beautiful, brilliant art of magic, expressing her complete disdain for the craft, only for our straight-faced wizard to flare up with a terrifying, dark aura and growl, "I will not tolerate this." Denise instantly flinches, her breath catching in her throat, as his glowing crimson eyes bore directly into her soul, making her desperately regret poking the sleeping bear as she clutches her teacup in terror. Over in the noble district of Ebelstein, the exhausted Azeline sits completely alone by her window, looking down in a quiet, melancholy daze. She recalls their meeting in the dark cave, remembering his unwavering focus, and her own desperate plea for him to guide her, as the young mage simply stood his ground, leaving her to realize that his firm decision was always set in stone. She reaches her hand out toward the glass, murmuring that she thought the rigid social standards were everything, only to realize she was never truly free. A knock at the door breaks her trace as her maid enters, bearing an official letter from the main family estate. The maid notes that her brother Valerian's departure ceremony is next week, prompting the workaholic lady to decide she must find a highly practical gift for him, resolving to head straight to the market to buy something sturdy to survive the dangerous white zone. But as she stands, her cheap, overloaded chair snaps with a loud crack, leaving it lying completely shattered on the sunlit floor as a testament to her chaotic stress. As night falls over Denise's grand estate, the sharp-tongued lady is currently sprawled across her bed, ranting that her new tutor is completely out of his mind. She complains that he glared at her like a demon, claiming she doesn't know a single good thing about magic, huffing that he is trying to force his obsession onto everyone else. Her maid Bella Cheeky replies that she hopes this means Denise will stop forcing her to read those trashy romance novels, instantly triggering Denise to sit up and scream that she won't tolerate her insulting those beautiful, brilliant literary works, scolding her maid with the exact same terrifying glare her tutor used on her. Bella merely sighs, dryly pointing out that she simply finds the trashy books boring. Denise flops back down, realizing she has hired a legendary teacher who solved the Duplain crisis and earned Ellen's respect, only to realize the ultimate, agonizing catch of her situation. Her maid smilingly tells her to just go to sleep, flashing a series of increasingly exasperated and sweet grins as Denise begs her to listen. She whines for her attention, pointing out that if she fails to learn anything under such a renowned master, she will look like the most incompetent fool in the entire empire. He burrows deep under her heavy blankets, muttering, "I just want to live by lying down and reading novels." But her maid ruthlessly points out her book allowance will be immediately slashed if she fires him. She cocoons herself completely in her blanket, thrashing around in a wild, muffled tantrum, before popping her head out to pout, staring blankly into the room in utter defeat. She is haunted by the memory of him demanding what she is doing there, and her own squeaky, terrified response. But as they bicker, a sinister and dark shadow looms on the horizon, watching their every move. Before leaving, dressed Wolfietail offers some parting wisdom as they sit by the crackling campfire, advising our pragmatic commoner wizard to maintain good relations with the three major noble houses, though he warns there is absolutely no need to pledge loyalty to any specific side, recommending instead that he walk the tightrope between the three houses and keep them anxious to ensure his own safety. Eric takes the lesson to heart as he silently stares into the embers, and soon he's putting that tactical advice to use at the Grand Duplain mansion, where his lazy young mistress is still fast asleep and snoring like a rusty chainsaw. He walks straight into her bedroom and slams a wooden stick against a frying pan, causing the noble lady to bolt upright with a sudden scream, as she immediately shrieks and asks if he has completely lost his mind. The low-born magic teacher calmly explains that since the sun is high and she refused to wake up, a loud noise was necessary, which only makes her protest. "Can't you see I'm in my pajamas right now?" Derek just stares back with an unimpressed, deadpan expression, before giving her a strict 5-minute deadline to change and get outside, leaving her room as the door shuts behind him with a heavy thud. Left alone and utterly flustered, the pillow-hugging noblewoman seethes, but she eventually gets dressed and meets him downstairs over a cup of morning tea. The low-born magic teacher questions why she is making such a fuss about basic discipline, arguing that a member of the elite Rosia Salon trio must maintain some refinement even on weekends. She fires back that as his employer, she does not agree with his ridiculous standards, demanding why he refuses to operate within the boundaries of the rules she set. In response, our slum-born instructor simply reaches into his coat, presenting her with an official contract, while declaring that his employer is Grand Duke Veltus, who delegated absolute authority over her magic training to him. The young mistress is left entirely speechless by the betrayal, and before she can even recover, he ruthlessly begins listing today's intense schedule, outlining a light breakfast followed immediately by a search-type magic assessment, ignoring her desperate screams about how it is a weekend and she deserves to rest. He calmly adds that she will also be relearning combat-type elemental magic from the ground up, which sends her spiraling into a pit of pure dread. She stares into space like a soldier facing a firing squad, breaking into a cold sweat as she realizes there is no escape, clutching at her collar as her heart rate spikes, while he detail-orientedly schedules the afternoon physical training and mana utilization classes. She frantically screams for him to wait, confronting him in the garden because he promised not to overdo things on a weekend, but he maintains his stoic look, reminding her that maintaining the basics is actually the most difficult task of all. She tearfully calls him a complete madman, while a nearby maid hangs the laundry on the line, watching with a mix of curiosity and concern as the noble lady is forced to go for an exhausting run around the estate, gasping for air like someone who just dragged themselves out of a deep lake. Her blunt maidservant, Bella, just smiles and cheers her on from the sidelines, while her mistress runs with a face that is a complete mess of sweat and tears, as our slum-born instructor keeps pushing her forward with a wooden training rod. When night finally falls over the estate, the exhausted girl collapses into a warm bathtub and groans that she is going to die. Bella ruthlessly scolds her, warning that her laziness might end up landing her in hell instead, prompting the young mistress to complain that the maid is just like her tutor and lacks any human emotion. But Bella just looks down with a cold, blank stare, noting that, without blood and tears, a human dies, leaving Diella to whine that she cannot even fire her tormentor because of her father's contract. Bella suggests she should just complain to the Grand Duke directly, prompting the girl to beg Bella to back her up by lying that Derek is lazy and useless. The maid flatly refuses, knowing her mistress does not actually want to lose such a capable teacher, especially since other noble houses are greedily eyeing his talent, and her father will never compromise on anything that affects the family's honor. He sinks into the bubbles with a heavy sigh, but later, she walks down the corridor cheering up at the prospect of finally reading her favorite novel, refusing to sleep because she cannot give up her only joy, only to turn the corner and find our pragmatic commoner wizard blocking her path. She nearly jumps out of her skin at the sudden sight of him, letting out a startled scream. She demands to know why he is still here, terrified that there is more training, but he just sighs and asks what kind of nonsense she is talking about, which only makes her scream that he has already pushed her too far. He calmly ignores her tantrum to announce tomorrow's dawn schedule, while she covers her ears and frantically screams for the guards to drag him away. When morning arrives anyway, the young mistress is left lying flat on her back on the bed like a wet towel dropped on the floor. She groans that she has been suffering like this for 3 whole years, but her maid corrects her that it has only been 3 days, which she mutters is a lie as her hair is gently brushed. But she instantly perks up when Bella mentions that training is canceled today because of her salon meeting. Bella keeps working on her hair as she absorbs the wonderful news, and she suddenly realizes that today is indeed the day of her big social escape. She bolts toward the door, urging her maid to hurry before the crazy man catches them. But our pragmatic commoner wizard is already waiting by the door to ask if she slept well. Begins to detail today's physical and theoretical lessons, but she defiantly pulls down her hat and declares that she has a critical social meeting, proudly strutting past him to demand if he has any idea how important her high society activities are. Surprisingly, he agrees, calmly stating that he will simply wait at the mansion until she returns, stoically telling her, "Please take your time," leaving her incredibly suspicious as she wonders why her wicked tutor is letting her off so easily. But as she walks away, his eyes glow with a dark, calculating intensity, proving that our star lecturer has something much more devious planned. As the carriage rolls toward the massive Duplain estate under a heavy sunset, our lazy noble girl slumps against the cushions like a half-empty sack of flour, ignoring her maid who points out how her high society energy completely evaporated the moment they headed home, especially since she shudders at the thought of facing her tutor, whom she considers an absolute beast of a man. Just as she starts to despair, a sudden flash of inspiration hits her, and she sparks a glowing orb of magic right there in her palm, announcing her plan to flip the carriage and disguise it as an accident to skip training, with her hand crackling like a faulty lantern, as she smugly asks if she is a genius for inventing such a perfect excuse, only for her horrified maid to tackle her to the floor before she can blow them both to pieces. And they finally arrive intact. Our slum-born tutor is standing by the entrance, chatting warmly with the elderly gardener Mr. Feb, which completely throws Diella off since she has never seen him act like a normal human being, though instead of launching into another exhausting workout, Derek calmly tells her to head upstairs for some self-study, leaving her utterly dumbfounded by the sudden lack of physical torture. He sits by her window trying to enjoy the unexpected peace, but her paranoia flares when she looks down into the courtyard, sneaking downstairs only to find Derek laughing in the kitchen with the chef, before catching him showing off magical tricks to a delighted young maid. The blatant display of social butterfly behavior makes her deeply suspicious, so she corners her own maid to find out why the tutor is suddenly chatting up the entire staff, demanding that Bella swear her loyalty and remember whose side she is on. Her loyal maid smiles and promises that she would never dream of switching allegiances, assuring her mistress that she enjoys serving her more than anyone else in the world. Yet merely an hour later, that same maid is walking through the courtyard with Derek, giggling and blushing, as if she has just met her favorite romance novel hero. Diella screeches her name in pure betrayal, her frustration boiling over under the glowing red evening sky as she storms out to confront him, declaring that this mansion and everyone